Yeah, before we jump in, I know I mentioned it to you in my email, but this translation that I picked up from the local bookstore is definitely like, it's very modernized. So yeah, you've got
Who's the guy? Who's the guy that you
it's
have?
David Ferry
Hmm.
is his name. Who was the translator there, or
This is
is that
this is
just
Andrew George. So I
okay?
mean, this is an edition from 2019. So this is he had an edition, I think, from the 90s, and he just recently updated it with like more. There's been more fragments of tablets found and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a pretty good translation, but it would be interesting since like we've read different editions. I could also tell based on your notes that we have like some of the specifics that you get into don't really appear in my edition, right?
Mhm.
And it could be because like maybe something is grabbed from like some of the Gilgamesh poems as opposed to the epic. But finding these discrepancies is interesting. Oftentimes, if I'm like reading something about Gilgamesh online, it's just sort of like, I'm not sure exactly what the referencing because it's not something that I read in the text, right? So, but it's kind of it's interesting in the sense that you're forced to have this comprehensive kind of point of view, right? Where little pieces you get or you don't get, not having or having these fragments, you're going to have your interpretations a little bit different, right? And yeah, so I think it's actually a good choice, even if it seems a little counterintuitive, that we just kind of are going into this a little bit blind, right? I haven't read your edition, you haven't read mine, but I think it's good.
Yeah, I agree. I do have the Andrew George translation pulled up on Internet Archive,
Hmm.
so I'll be able to reference that as we go along. And but yeah, like I said, I made little
Hmm.
noted pages of hopefully the same approximate section
Hmm.
that you would have highlighted in your notes. Maybe we read the George version of it. Maybe we read the Ferry version of it. Talk
Hmm.
about how that all comes together. But yeah, I did enjoy reading this version just because it's a little bit like maybe what an epic poem like this would be stylized as if someone was writing it today,
Hmm.
or in his case, this was an early '90s translation. So it's sort of this odd dissonance in a way because you're reading about these old time epic characters and still the names of the gods, their names, the places that they go, all these things, but then some of the language is very just sort of pared down and oblique and modernized in a way that
Hmm.
that you'll see, or viewers will see, just offers a little something different as you're going through. So hopefully it'll be beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess we could get into some of the specifics now about these, the history of this epic. But one thing I'd point out is, so like, I'm not sure exactly how a translator should handle this translation specifically because I don't read these languages, but uh, it strikes me as like you do want to sort of modernize things a little bit, simply because of the fact that, I mean, Gilgamesh compared to, I'd say most epic poems, it really is a lot more modern, right?
Mhm.
Compared to the Odyssey, compared to even, the Iliad, like it's definitely more modern. It's even more character driven, right? Where you get so many nuances and so many kinds of like, Gilgamesh might be sort of characterized a certain way, but then you immediately see a set of behaviors that contradict that. And then after that, you see some other kind of transformation. You don't get that as much with these other ancient epics, right? Which, so like you would think like, okay, so if you have this truly modern technique that is not really available elsewhere, when it comes to the individual lines, how you might phrase certain things, like I think it makes sense, right? I think I could justify some of these like slightly more modernized renderings of lines that might, be a little bit more prosaic otherwise. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, do you want to get into like the history of the text, like I guess the various versions and how it came to be how it is now? Our editions that we
Yeah.
read today.
Yeah, I think we should, and we can talk a bit about for me when I was going through. I was asking myself, why is this poetry? Why is this one of our oldest versions of poetry? And it is an epic poem. So it's quite a bit different from a lot of the poetry we might read today, and striking from the standpoint of, with this and with other epic poems from the past, there's this sense that these characters have to be really grand. They have to go to epic places. They have to have these battles and do glorious things for it to be noteworthy enough to put down in an oral tradition, and then maybe now in a written form like they were on these tablets. Whereas today, a lot more poetry, some of it can still have that flavor to it, but you can have just as good and in fact quite a bit better poetry from small moments, insignificant people or insignificant seeming things, and extract meaning out of it. So it's interesting to read something like this from so long ago and trace poetry's arc to today. But one of the things that maybe we can go back and forth on is, why this? Why did this become one of our oldest examples of poetry in any way? But yeah, let's talk a little bit about how it came to be. Right, there were these different tablets that were written out. What were the approximate years on this? It's like
I think yeah, the first ones you would have. What do I have here? So this is after he was deified, right? So like Gilgamesh himself, like from like 2900 to maybe like 2300, people don't exactly know when he was the king of Uruk, right? The city state. Mm-hmm. But at some point, for whatever reason, he was deified. He became part of this kind of cult tradition. And so it's like the old Babylonian and then the standard edition. So the old Babylonian is so it's 2100 BCE. Yep. And the recompiling also don't exactly know when it was done, but the latest is like 1200 BCE. So a little more than 3,000 years ago at this point. It would be the latest point that the edition that we're talking about was recompiled, right? Into
the standard Babylonian, as it's known now. Yeah. Okay. Which comes in at least a few hundred years before anything that's the oldest from, for example, the Bible, as far as we know, right? So and we'll talk later about some of the tales and the scenes in here that predate things biblically, and we've got a special little video later on to talk about some of those parallels. But yeah, that's just it is ancient writing, a few thousand years old at this point, and composed in these various tablets. I don't think I've got a whole lot more to say about the history of it. I mean, I suppose, like most other ancient epics, were approximating this took place in the ancient Middle East, Iraq and Iran, these kind of physical geographies, right? That's the I'm not sure exactly how your edition differs in this respect, but I actually have when you have like a broken tablet, right, from the standard edition, where you sort of have to make guesses as to what's written in there. Oftentimes Andrew George is just like retranslating pieces from the Gilgamesh poems, right? So before, like you had the what is known as the Epic of Gilgamesh, you had the Gilgamesh poems. And also he's using pieces from the old Babylonian epic as well, right? So if you have like information that's missing, it's just sort of kind of filled in, right? So, and some of it doesn't seem to truly fit. But again, like I think that's one of the kind of quaint features that does add to it, right? You definitely get the sense that Gilgamesh himself and Enkidu are both, like fully formed human beings, but you're also getting a little bit of that from the fact that, whatever might have really been the standard edition, 1,000 years before that, you could have just, collected so much of a tradition already, right? So that could really help flesh out some of the characters. And I mean, when you're wondering about, well, why is this in so many respects
just often better than a lot of ancient poetry. I think that might be one of the reasons, right? Like, why is Enkidu or Gilgamesh more human? Like, well, maybe it's because they are a collation, essentially, right? Of so much, right? That would otherwise like not really be put in, right? If you're just like an individual writer, right? Just kind of putting stuff together, and you're limited by your time period, and you're limited by the fact that, you know, you don't have much of a tradition to work with. Well, if someone else kind of steps in and adds to it simply out of necessity, right? You might come out with something a little bit better, given the fact of what's actually missing, right? Before today, I think it kind of goes the opposite way, right?
The opposite, yeah.
The more people that get involved in a work of art, the worse that it is. Like, sometimes I wonder, like, oh my God, like, can you imagine that? Like, movies, right? Like, to me, it's so fascinating that you could have like something called a great film, right? Simply because you need at this point, oftentimes, like dozens of people involved. Right. And right. I just imagine myself, if I were in that situation, it's like, I would want to like whip everybody into like one singular vision. Right. But that's kind of hard to do. And you have to be respectful of like the fact that, you know, if you're a director or a writer, you know, you have 20 other people that are, you know, oftentimes artists in their own right, that you can't just, you know, run roughshod over them. But yep. I think if you have something that's sort of missing to begin with, the advantage does go the other way.
Yeah.
So
right. I think you're right in that this benefits from the chiming in of some other voices and translators and people piecing it together over time. And it is, to me, some of the most interesting things about this poem are the failures that the characters go through, both of their character and some of their literal undertakings, and it creates, like you said, these moments of a bit more humanity that come through, and a lot of the writing is good, and it's pretty it is poetic. There are a number of moments of beauty or intrigue or multiplicity or ambiguity that come in, and that is one of the things I liked about my translation in particular, was I felt like some of that is pretty well written and comes through in a modern sensibility. So, there's a lot to unpack and a decent amount to recommend in here. So what do we want to do? I guess we'll just start.
I guess for anyone that hasn't read it, do you want to just like give like a synopsis of what happens in the text, and then we could get into the individual tablets and scenes. I mean, I have a summary here if you want me to read it, or if you're ready to go, you could just do that too.
Why don't you go ahead with your summary? I'll fill in any gaps that seem to pop up, and then we'll make a couple more comments before diving into some specific writing sections.
So the text opens up with Gilgamesh being presented as, you know, king of Uruk, in very kind of, you know, highfalutin language, right? He's very much praised by the narrator of the text. He's said to be wise, right? It starts by saying, at least in my edition, he who saw the deep, right? Gilgamesh who saw the deep. But it very quickly takes this kind of interesting turn where, after like about a page and a half of praise for Gilgamesh and his wisdom, without any sort of, you know, explanation, it immediately goes into Gilgamesh who is oppressing his people, right? Gilgamesh who is harrying, you know, his citizens, both men and women, in various ways. It gets so bad that the townspeople, they end up kind of crying out to the gods for some sort of, you know, answer to this. And the answer that's come up with is they ultimately construct Enkidu, right, from kind of like the dust, right? This wild man who is supposed to be as powerful, right, and as wise as Gilgamesh, right? And eventually the two meet. And after they meet, right, they brawl, right? And although Enkidu loses that brawl, right, he's powerful enough that Gilgamesh is ready to respect him. And for the first time, this isn't made explicit, but when Gilgamesh leaves instruction for how his town is supposed to be kind of cared for as he goes off on his adventures with Enkidu, you get the sense that, perhaps like for the first time, like the town is getting some respite, right, from this kind of tyranny. And they go off to the cedar forest. They fight this giant Humbaba. And after they defeat Humbaba, they're sort of they go back and they're praised by the townspeople. The goddess, what's her name, Ishtar? Yeah, Ishtar ends up falling in love with Gilgamesh and trying to seduce him into marriage. And he rejects her. He points out to the fact that, hey, look at everybody that you married before you, right? And they're all in some sort of dire straits. There's one like little interesting kind of a thing where I think it's Ishtar's brother. Because of her, she tries to like take over I think it's the underworld at some point, and her brother is like condemned to spend like half of the year in the underworld, right, and switch places with his wife. And that's supposed to, explain the seasons in the same way that we have Persephone, right, in Greek mythology, explaining the seasons, right, by having to spend half of her time in the underworld with Hades. So Gilgamesh rejects her and says, I'm not going to do this to myself because I know where this is going to end up. She gets upset. She, demands the gods send the bull of heaven to kill Gilgamesh and Enkidu and, destroy the town. They ultimately defeat this bull, and this damns Enkidu to death, right? The gods come together and they say, one of you has to die. They choose Enkidu. Gilgamesh is in mourning. So this seems to have this kind of like psychological effect on him. So he ultimately like just goes around trying to find like real, like literal immortality, right? Yeah. Fails to do so. And then it seems like he realizes that whatever immortality that I could get, right, it's better served by creating, valuable works for people and for the world, as opposed to seeking this thing, right, of just kind of, trying to live forever. And it's sort of like the way that it opens up, sort of giving this kind of vista, right, into the city of Uruk. It kind of ends in that same way too. It's this like interesting kind of circle that, again, like a very kind of, I don't want to say it's a new technique, but, in terms of what we have available, it's different from ancient poetry, and it's much closer to what we would find today, right, in writing, as opposed to what we would expect from older writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good synopsis. We'll get into it more specifically. The only thing that came to mind immediately was the dream series that Gilgamesh goes through as he and Enkidu are setting out toward the cedar forest, and the constant positive spin on the interpretation from Enkidu, and it is a bit of a fulcrum in the text. So we'll get more specific on that. And I was going to ask you as well, because I didn't click all the way through to the end of the Andrew George translation. Is Tablet 12 included in that, where Gilgamesh loses his quote drum and drumstick into the underworld and speaks again with Enkidu?
I think he puts it into an appendix, like with a summary, but I don't think it's in here. My edition is the poem plus like some of the kind of older poetry related to the Gilgamesh cult. But so like, can you, cause I noticed that in your notes, but since I didn't remember reading that, I wasn't sure what to refer to. So what happens with this drumstick, and what is the purpose of, Tablet 12, since we're just kind of summarizing still?
Yeah. So it is basically an appendix or epilogue kind of piece. It's not very long at all, probably about the same length as any of the other tablets, but it kicks off with, it feels almost like a jump cut to some years later or something, right? And so Gilgamesh has been in the home of a carpenter and had a drum and drumstick fashioned for himself that then fell through a quote, a hole in the floor or a hole in the earth down into the netherworld. And he has this conversation with Enkidu where he asks about the possibility of retrieving it, or Enkidu even offers to get it for him. And so there's this setup where the reader thinks that maybe they'll have some kind of reunion, or maybe maybe Enkidu can come back to life or be resurrected. You're not quite sure what's going to happen. And basically they do talk for a bit, and they have this moment of going toward that kind of thing. And more or less it's just shown once again that Enkidu is essentially a spirit or a shadow at this point and will not be returning. And so then when Gilgamesh realizes that, he just starts asking Enkidu about the netherworld. It's this curiosity of sorts where he kind of says, hey, I've heard this about it. Is that true? Or tell me how this goes according to what we've heard before. And Enkidu kind of walks him through it. So in my translation, I'm happy to, maybe when we get through to that, to the end of all the other 11 tablets, read a couple sections that I thought were A, interesting, B, some good writing and good phrasing, and maybe lastly, just sort of set up a couple interesting juxtapositions with the rest of the text, because it ends in a similar to what you just said with the end of tablet 11 for the main story, where it's this sort of pan out where we're just looking at Uruk again, and it's sort of just left in a way that feels like more modern and cinematic almost. The end of tablet 12 is kind of like that too, where it's just there's not a whole lot of resolution. It seems to end quite abruptly when you're reading it, but then when you're done with it, it's kind of like, you know what, that's actually a more interesting way for this to wrap up. That's sort of intriguing. So yeah, I think it's worthwhile. It's an interesting.
Okay. Yeah, let's get to that, because one thing I was going to ask you is it weaker than the rest? Because tablet 12, from what I read, it was sort of added like much later, and you know, it kind of made me think like, you know, is this going to be a sort of, you know, Ecclesiastes type thing where like the final chapter is just kind of, you know, added at the end, and it feels like it doesn't truly fit. It feels like it's just kind of this thing to justify, you know, a kind of like more, you know, a typically biblical interpretation of God and spirituality. But yeah, that's interesting. We should get to it after. I mean, let's just like, I guess, start then with tablet 1 and whatever that we found in it. So like it starts this way, right? So this is how it's differentiated from the Old Babylonian, right? The Old Babylonian has a different starting line, and the standard edition begins, "He who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew the proper ways, was wise in all matters. Gilgamesh, who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew the proper ways, was wise in all matters. He explored everywhere the seats of power. He knew of everything the sum of wisdom. He saw what was secret, discovered what was hidden. He brought back a tale of before the deluge," right? So there is a flood myth, right, in Gilgamesh and in Sumerian religion in general that we're going to get to, which is almost identical actually to the biblical flood myth. And so this is kind of how it starts, right? It's about a page and a half of really kind of praising Gilgamesh, right? And we have like phrasing like, you know, surpassing all other kings, heroic of stature, brave scion of Uruk, wild bull on the rampage. It starts to then like get into these characterizations that are, you know, a little more kind of like, it made me wonder, like I put this in the notes, like what is the difference between our interpretation of goodness versus greatness compared to maybe how the ancients saw it, compared to how Nietzsche saw it? Like Nietzsche had a much more kind of, you know, a Greek view of a phrase like terrible, right? Or a Greek view of a phrase like greatness. Like even something like, you know, in history, like Ivan the Terrible, right? It's not necessarily even that he's just bad, right? Terrible has this kind of, you know, aspect of dread to it, of greatness to it, and it's these phrases that are, you know, they're a lot more innocuous now, right? And you know, Nietzsche would interpret greatness in a different way, right? It would be very much distinct from personal goodness. So you have like these characterizations that are, like a wild bull on the rampage. And it's not simply that, he's like defeating the enemies of Uruk. He's also, in the end, like we learned that he's oppressing his own people. And just kind of really unexpectedly, you suddenly get this stanza right after like a page and a half of praise. The young men of Uruk he harries without warrant. Gilgamesh lets no son go free to his father. By day and by night, his tyranny grows harsher. Gilgamesh, the guide of the teeming people. So here, it's like an objective statement, right? He's still a guide, right, of these people, but he's a guide in the context of also being a tyrant, right? So I guess the first thing I would ask is like, did you have any responses to like that aspect of it? Just the fact that this like notion of greatness, it's so, it's very different from like the average person today, how they would interpret such a thing.
Yeah, so I did, and it is striking to get that immediate juxtaposition. Just briefly in my translation with the turning phrases where we do get some characterization of him as a tyrant. It says, there was no withstanding the aura or power of the wild ox, Gilgamesh, neither the father's son, nor the wife of the noble, neither the mother's daughter, nor the warrior's bride was safe. The old men said, is this the shepherd of the people? Is this the wise shepherd, protector of the people? So it is striking from that standpoint to hear all these great things and this epic characterization of him, but then immediately have some people questioning whether he's really the best one to have at the helm here. And I guess when I was first going through and reading it, part of what struck me was, he is characterized as 2/3 God, 1/3 man. So some of these acts that he's engaging in and the way that he's ruling is pretty similar to a lot of ancient gods and mythological gods, right? Where they are a terror, and at their whim, they'll just bring destruction and sadness upon lowly humans. So he seems to have like this 1/3 human aspect of himself where, he does have some measure of wisdom, and he's obviously the one out there doing the building and the envisioning of what Uruk could be. And on the one hand, the way that the text sets it up, it seems like the people are grateful for that, right? To have this great king who's doing great acts, and they want to follow him for that reason. But then at the same time, when he turns around and abuses that power, they're troubled by it. So I definitely, you get the immediate build of him as someone that you're intrigued by to see how his character develops, because he does seem great, and he's characterized as great in that Nietzschean sense. But you wonder what's going to become of him going forward.
It's actually a little bit like your translation is a little bit different. You have the people wondering, like, is this the person that's supposed to be our king? And in this translation, it says, just as a declarative without any quotation marks, it is he who is shepherd of Uruk the sheepfold, but Gilgamesh lets no daughter go free to her mother. He is their herdsman, they are the cows, their complaint carried up to furthest heaven, right? So here you just have this kind of declarative that this is in fact the case, whereas in your translation, it's kind of like people are questioning this, right? It makes me wonder, is this just like what exactly would the original say in that regard? Soon after that, we have so the complaints like go up, right? Let me see. And also the accomplishments, right, that he's sort of being praised for. It makes me wonder, did they already like come about, right? Because if ultimately he concludes that immortality is about doing great things, like is that the thing that spurs him to, you know, like a newfound kind of greatness, you know, by that definition? Or, you know, has he simply been a kind of more, you know, traditional, like not very good king that sort of did kind of like a maybe like some bare minimum thus far, right? Because it seems like so far people, you know, they fear him more than they respect him. And if there's not so much respect yet, you know, perhaps what he is truly known for is not yet, like at this point in the text, right? It has this kind of interesting set of techniques where, you know, in terms of the plot, like you're sort of starting from the end, right? Because now you already have the wisdom, you already have, you know, the objective praise and the objective respect. And we have this like immediate transition to here are Gilgamesh's flaws. And so that's like a signal that, okay, now we're in the present time. Now we're starting the text with Gilgamesh at the beginning before he ever meets Enkidu, right? So, you know, that's also kind of interesting way to think about it, right? The way that it's moving, you know, through time, again, is a very kind of modern in that regard.
It is. And one other thing I would highlight, because we're about to talk about the creation of Enkidu by the gods, is the parallels are many with the Bible or with other ancient texts, but we'll probably spend a little bit more time talking about the Bible today with some of our other examples. And you in your notes highlighted the Ecclesiastes nature, which of course we have that episode on Ecclesiastes from a while back, where it is this search for meaning, this search for permanence. And can I accomplish that via works? Gilgamesh seems to think so. And yet it's just interesting that we get these first few pages of a setup where he's here, he's the king, 2/3 God, 1/3 man. He's been doing what he's doing. And then the gods decide to create Enkidu to challenge him for whatever set of reasons, right? Maybe we'll talk about that. But it's just interesting to me because the Bible, straight from the get-go, is there's nothing before God. In the beginning was God, and he creates Adam and then subsequently Eve. And so even though there are certainly parallels, and it's talked about quite a bit in some of the literature on this, where the creation of Enkidu is kind of a precursor to the biblical creation of Adam, it's still pretty different because the set of reasons is so different. I mean, we need someone to challenge this other person who already exists and has been going about ruling for some time. So to me, I mean, I get the parallels, but that's, as I was holding that in my head and reading through this, I was like, yeah, but this is so different. And in a way, modern, that there's some sort of rationale for the creation of Enkidu to challenge this other man who's kind of getting out of hand. So, yeah.
I think that's all. I mean, and just to like bring back to Ecclesiastes, I guess we could talk about this a little bit later, but just in general, I do find it interesting that the focus again is on things that don't necessarily exist anymore, right? When we're talking about like the great works of Gilgamesh, right? The building of cities. I mean, if you look up Uruk right now in Wikipedia, you know, it's a city in, you know, of all places, Iraq, right? Which is the name Uruk. It's a city in Iraq. It's been demolished mostly, and you know, just like in Ecclesiastes, right? They're focusing on this idea of like vanity, right? Like all is vanity. Men's work is vanity, but the thing that Solomon in Ecclesiastes is focused on is like, you know, he hires out, you know, like pop singers to go like sing for him and dancers to sing for him. And he constructs like vineyards, and he seems to be like overindulging in wine and drugs and, you know, things that, you know, are, you know, they're more aesthetic than arts related, right? They're more kind of experiential, right? In the sense that, you know, aesthetics is more kind of about the experience of art as opposed to art itself. He's not so concerned with the arts, which seem to be the only thing that really stand the test of time, right? And you have the same thing here, but the irony, of course, is that for all the kind of critique you might say of Gilgamesh being overly focused on the here and now in terms of like constructing of like physical structures, the cult that is, developing around him, let's say that he was like really good at what he did, and that's what justified the subsequent cult. That cult was large enough to eventually create, a work of art that is used to this day, right? That is referenced, that is read, that appears in different ways, and inspires like new art, right? New works. And we have this text before us, right? But we don't have the city. Right. We don't have much else, but we still always have the text. And, and we said the same thing when we discussed Ecclesiastes, right? In the sense that Solomon is so concerned about all being vanity. And yet, the one thing that he did, well, ostensibly, let's assume he wrote the book, right? Probably not, but that's part of the myth, right? The one thing that he does that is not all vanity is write, a book that is now a classic, right, from the Bible, and is among one of the best books in the Bible, right, and is still among the best ancient writing that we have. So
yeah, exactly. So I don't think I've got anything else to add there for now. So do we want to move into the creation of Enkidu here and what transpires? Yeah, I mean, so well, whatever that you have on that, we could just start with that, I guess. Yeah, well, let's actually read it in the section that you highlighted, because I like the phrasing better in the Andrew George interpretation. So let's see where that is. So let's see, we've got page 4. So I can read it here. It says, "Let them summon Uruk, the Great One. She it was created them, mankind so numerous. Let her create the equal of Gilgamesh, one mighty in strength, and let him vie with him, so Uruk may be rested. They summoned Uruk, the Great One. You, Uruk, created mankind, now fashion what Anu has thought of." Page 5 now. "Let him be a match for the storm of his heart. Let them vie with each other, so Uruk may be rested. The goddess Uruk heard these words. What Anu had thought of, she fashioned within her. The goddess Uruk, she washed her hands, took a pinch of clay, threw it down in the wild. In the wild, she created Enkidu, the hero, offspring of silence, knit strong by Ninurta." So we can break it off there, because then it gets into some, characterization of Enkidu. But first of all, what's interesting to note there is the repetitive language, which you highlighted in your notes, and I certainly noticed upon reading this initially, is like we don't need to go into it in too much detail, but it is just interesting how much repetition, word for word, line for line, there are really big chunks of the entire book, the entire epic, that are just copied and pasted basically and repeated. So I guess
in the mouths of different characters, right? Which is kind of the interesting part. Yeah. So, I think on the one hand, you'd obviously make like kind of the typical argument that, well, maybe part of that is just the oral tradition that this existed within. So we need, to really drive it home for any audience that's listening to this, repetition always helps. But beyond that, like you just said, it is kind of an interesting technique to take it and put it in the mouths of these different characters. And so it makes you, as a modern reader, I guess, sort of, I don't know, it unsettles you in a way, because you're like, well, okay, so it's repetition of the exact same lines, but from a different character, different perspective. Like, are they simply agreeing with what was said? Are they wanting to jump in and almost usurp what was said, but then they don't change it in any way? So that's kind of interesting. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on the repetitive nature of the language. Yeah, my immediate response was just kind of like, in this kind of like I guess metafictional way, we have a narrator, right? We have a writer, and we also have like a set of gods, right? On the one hand, you have the writer that's sort of kind of setting everybody in this kind of off in the situation where they're doing this repeating. but the gods are often the ones doing the repeating too, right? So it's sort of like, people are compelled, right, to sort of take on the perspectives of the gods, right? Kind of like, we're going to get into like this idea of like whether or not these gods are just, right? But there's this kind of, perhaps like a coercive element. But also, again, like just going back, like whether or not the writer knew about this, right? Whether or not, Uruk was still like a fully standing city in the way that Gilgamesh had constructed it, or was, already in some form of decay. The fact is, like, the book as it existed, right, as it was constituted. I mean, if this thing was still around, essentially it's like the sense that, I as a writer, right, I'm able to do this thing, right? I'm able to have people speak in this way. I'm able to put words in others' mouths, right? I'm able to do this thing that will outlast, like, even, Gilgamesh, even the city. And again, this is one of those things where, like if Leonard Shlain, right, would be, using his analysis and applying it to things outside of a visual art, he would say something like, well, this is an example of how art more broadly, right, writing, how it could sort of foresee the future, right? It could tell you that this is what people will be focusing on, this is what they'll be discussing, as opposed to kind of like the more kind of superficial elements of day-to-day existence, which, the construction of buildings, even if they're huge and imposing, right, that it would fall under a more kind of prosaic reality, whereas writing is not. So that's sort of my take on the kind of repetition that we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. And then you in your notes highlighted, what else did you say about Enkidu with his description? So offspring of silence.
Yeah.
And that phrase, which is definitely poetic and interesting. I guess reading it, so that's a much better phrasing, I think, than anything I've got in my translation. So let's go with that. I think that where my mind went first was the spectral world, or the world of the gods. Is that being characterized as some way a place of silence, a land of silence? Which would be sort of interesting, because in a lot of mythology and even in Gilgamesh at certain points, it's the world of the gods seems much more cacophonous, right? It's argumentative, it's embattled, it's petty. There's all these things that go on that are just kind of people revenging personal affronts and whatever. But to have Enkidu be an offspring of silence, and maybe also, therefore, if he's supposed to be the equal of Gilgamesh, there must be some kind of power to silence, right? If he's an offspring of something, and he's meant to challenge the greatest living man god of the time, what does that say about silence itself? So, and also just interesting to say offspring of silence rather than offspring of these two gods or goddesses. So really, really striking line there. What other takes do you have on that?
Yeah, what I would add to that is, like you often get, like, in various like religious traditions, this idea of, like, some kind of void, right, before creation. And then also on the other hand, Enkidu is supposed to represent this kind of wild man, right? This kind of, like cropping up, in the wilds, and, being attuned to such, and eventually sort of, molting, that part of himself a little bit, when he enters into a society at large. But when you think of, like, this idea of, like, characters being presented as a kind of, like, noble savage in some ways, like, there is oftentimes, like, a pejorative element to instinct, right? To being, like, like a deaf and dumb mute, right? If you, for example, have no language, like as a wild person or a wild animal. But by characterizing Enkidu as, like, as the offspring of silence, just by poeticizing that kind of phrase, right, and by going away from the more kind of predictable deaf, dumb, mute type thing, that pejorative sense just kind of disappears, right? Just by the nature of just introducing poetry into it, right? So, and it also sets the stage for the fact that he does become a character of depth, right? He's not just a beast, right? He's not just there to be like a Rousseauan sort of noble savage, right?
Yeah.
So
even in his later role as the interpreter of dreams, it made me think about that, right? Because Gilgamesh
that's interesting. I didn't think of that. Yeah.
Yeah, Gilgamesh has these dreams, and it's Enkidu who steps in and interprets them for him. And so when I was reading through those sections, it was making me reflect back to this whole idea of the offspring of silence, and maybe like you said, the void or the dream world or the land of imagination where you must create something out of nothing. And dreams are, I guess, they are and aren't that way. Both, whatever. We don't need to get to too far of digression there at this moment. But anyway, yeah, just really good bit of characterization. And so I think that it's important, for anyone watching who, whether you're really experienced with reading poetry and maybe writing it or not, like this is the kind of stuff poetry can do, right? This is the power of a few words or one line to show up and immediately cast the rest of what comes after in a different or a multiple kinds of meaning and light. So really interesting little pivot moment there in the creation of Enkidu.
Yeah. And just a quick note, just so that we could remember to go back to it. So like when the dream sequences start, it makes me wonder whether or not this is an implicit criticism, right, of, a person of the wilds, right, sort of being this figure that wants to step inside the imagination and interpret, for example, dreams, because, you're just wondering whether or not these interpretations are just kind of they're kind of there, right, in a kind of self-serving fashion, right? They're there to kind of like overread, positive things, right, into something that ultimately comes out in negative fashion. If you want to interpret Enkidu's death, right, condemnation to die as negative. But before we even get to that part, so Enkidu's fashion in this way, there's like a trapper that is afraid of him, right? And anybody that approaches him seems to be afraid of him. The question becomes like how can this person be civilized? Because ultimately, the trapper's complaints about Enkidu does make its way to Gilgamesh, right? So, and the fact that Gilgamesh feels compelled to respond to the trapper and give him like a way to essentially like either civilize Enkidu or neutralize the threat that he has to his livelihood. It seems as if like even at that point, Gilgamesh is, even if he's like a tyrant, he does seem to be a little bit attuned at least to, the needs of his people, right? Here is an individual hunter who has this problem, right, in relation to his like day-to-day work. And Gilgamesh says, okay, for this to improve, you need to get the town prostitute Shamhat and bring her over. And if she sleeps with Enkidu, that could civilize him, and he could be sort of brought to the fold, right? He could be brought into your fold, and he could be, become a part of society, as opposed to being this, a scary figure that's just this kind of interference. And to me, I mean, the prostitute Shamhat is, she's a very interesting character because she's never allowed to be and this kind of surprised me, I think, most of all. She never is like denigrated in the text, right? Like normally when you see like prostitutes appear in ancient writing, that's considered like, an ultimate negative. And I mean, objectively probably was, right? I for all the kind of negative experiences that prostitutes have today, I'm sure it might have been, 1,000 times worse, right? Years and years ago. But she's never presented as like, a fallen woman, right? She's never presented as in any way kind of immoral. In fact, near the end of the text, when Enkidu is dying, he damns Shamhat for civilizing him and bringing him into this new world, and he gets reproached for that, by like a goddess, and says like, why would you ever condemn this woman that gave you such wonderful things like in life?
Right.
And from the beginning, like she's treated with a lot of respect, which is interesting. She does play the kind of more I'm not sure if I'd call it a stereotype, but definitely kind of like a bit of a stock role in the sense that, she's there to like civilize, man, right? Mm-hmm. And you kind of like the reason why I don't want to truly call it a stereotype is, I mean, there is some reality there, right? In the sense that, one of the best checks on male power is female power, right? And it to the modern person, that's kind of stuck on kind of very modern interpretations of feminism. This might sound kind of crazy, but I mean that's just kind of reality, right? China used to have these male riots from men who were just so that they would outnumber women so much that they felt like I can't have mates here. This is a problem, and there would be these riots related to the fact that there's nothing to placate them, right? So we know that anthropologically this is kind of reality, right? Like men who do not have access to women, this causes a kind of a kind of like violent dissolution in society. In the same way that women not having access to men, it's not like a violent dissolution, but it's a dissolution of a different sort, right? It's just that male versus female kind of if you want to interpret things a little bit biologically, whatever the imperatives are, they lead to both the same kind of negative conclusion in that way. And Shamhat, she's made to play this kind of role, but it's never done in a way that's kind of, it's never overdone, right? It's never truly like a negative thing. And she's always treated with a lot of respect. And the one time when she's being damned, right? Literally like a goddess intervenes and says, you cannot say this. This is not rational, and this is not fair, and this does not take into consideration everything that she was able to do for you.
Yeah, that's all true and well pointed out. I think another interesting parallel to make here is, again, if we're going to look at the Bible and the creation of Enkidu being some kind of parallel for the creation of Adam, and then as opposed to, the story of Adam and Eve, where then Eve gets created out of Adam's rib and more earth, Shamhat she already exists. She's already there. She's in Uruk, and she's commanded to go, see Enkidu and civilize him and sleep with him. And the way my text phrases it is show him what a woman can do, I think. And so, all of that happens and plays out. And then, like you said, she's never really ridiculed. Yet in the Bible, where we have Eve created out of a part of Adam, she's the one who first takes the temptation from the serpent, and then forever after, Eve is really characterized as the one who sort of it's her fault really that then Adam, also ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the downfall of all of humanity and the sinful nature of it, kind of thing. So, this woman in the Bible who is created in a pure way, without being a prostitute, without any kind of, prior set of conduct to judge her on, immediately goes and, and has this moment with the serpent, and it's kind of, in a way, her fault forever after. Whereas here, Shamhat, who could have been in some way, looked down upon as a prostitute for the things that she's been doing, or the role she's had in society in the past, has kind of this moment of a real positivity in a way, where she goes out and plays an important role for the whole rest of the story, and is never ridiculed for it. So just something I noticed reading through.
And also just reading this now, it just made me kind of like to go back to the Eve story. I can see exactly why, right? The Eve story is typically interpreted as, this kind of, anti-feminist thing, right? This damnation of a woman and, woman damning everyone else for, her own kind of like, curiosity and her own kind of, manipulativeness. But at the same time, like when I see, Enkidu dying and he's like, trying to damn Shamhat, it made me think, like, in relation to Eve, maybe a Christian might interpret the story in such a way, but I wonder to what extent, like, can we really damn Eve as like just by the text alone, right? I mean, so when Enkidu ends up complaining about, like, this is what you did to me, you brought me into society for no reason, I could have just been with my flocks forever and I would have still been alive, but what the goddess ends up telling him is, well, she brought you into civilization, like she brought you into knowledge, like she brought you into real understanding. And even if you have to ultimately sacrifice your life for it eventually, isn't there like a kind of like greater than, isn't there like a greatness to being able to have knowledge, being able to have this kind of newfound wisdom, being able to understand what society is and engage with it and do something in this context, as opposed to just being essentially more robot like? Because the more the lower that we go into this kind of animal kingdom, right, the more robotic animals are. Human beings, even if they're kind of robotic in many senses, they definitely have less of a kind of robotic bottom line, in some ways at least. And I think, like, in the context of Gilgamesh, which is why this is kind of so interesting to compare to the Bible, in the context of Gilgamesh, it does seem to me that Eve does fulfill a similar kind of function as Shamhat, which is she introduces Adam to actual knowledge, the actual meaning of being a person, right, of being a human being. And it's true that being a human being comes with so much suffering and so many negatives, but I wonder, is that really worse than a situation where you're kind of like just essentially a faultless animal that can do no wrong because God sort of, engendered this kind of machine and set it rolling without any kind of input from you. Now you have like some control, and now you have the ability to, construct things that are like objectively there. You could actually construct a society. You could actually engage in the arts. You could actually deal with things like, sadness and the human condition that is not available to you, otherwise. And, mortality itself gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of, I must do certain things and I must avoid others, right? The line from what is it? I forget which Chinese text that has this, but you must stop wasting time in distant lands, right? So it seems to me like there's definitely many interpretations of Eve, through the lens of Gilgamesh that would make it seem as if like this is not the negative that it's portrayed to be, as long as you are okay with like being a human being, right? Like if you want something else for you, right, fine. But if you're actually okay with being a person and you're not pining for, just a pure animal kingdom, just like Shamhat, Eve in some ways creates a service, right, for the world that God, ironically, is not able to do for people, right, himself.
Right. Well, and one final thought there before we move on is just that the other key difference is in the Bible, this effort to know is viewed as evil. Yeah. Right? It's portrayed as a sin and it's a problem, and you were trying to get on God's level, and therefore you must be punished for that. I'll give you what you want. Now you'll have all this knowledge of good and evil, which will bring you suffering and pain and difficulty in childbearing, and the earth won't yield crops for you, and all these kind of things that happen as a knock-on effect in the Bible. Whereas here, it's like, if Enkidu enters into society, it's more positive. He's not trying to be a god. He's just trying to go live where people live and see do what people do rather than, exist as, like you said, kind of an robotic, instinctual only animal type existence. So anyway, now, he goes to Uruk with Shamhat and wrestles with Gilgamesh, and things transpire from there. So you want to jump to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, is there like anything else in Tablet 1? Just to get back to this kind of like idea of Christian morality, there is this kind of a part in Gilgamesh where Enkidu, by having sex with Shamhat, like, the animals are no longer trusting of him, right? They run away. He loses power, right? Yeah. He's less physically imposing. It makes me wonder, like, if he were to fight Gilgamesh in his former state, would he have won? My guess is he very well could have, but now he's kind of like molting the skin, and the text like phrases it as he defiles himself, right, by having sex, not by having sex with a prostitute, but just by the action of sex, right? So there is like still this kind of like sense, but this defilement is not even it's hard to say to what degree these are truly moral terms versus like, are we just doing this kind of like objective thing of, greatness versus something, lesser than greatness, where, now, Enkidu is less, he's less fast, right? He's physically weaker. And again, just kind of like the irony that Gilgamesh is the one that ultimately, through kind of like it's almost as if like the gods knew, right, that if we create this Enkidu who's going to create some kind of problem for the society, right, where a trapper is not able to make his living anymore, Gilgamesh, being Gilgamesh, will be compelled to civilize Enkidu, right, and ultimately force Enkidu into a meeting with him, right? So it's almost as if like it was written, right, it was preordained in some ways. And also Gilgamesh, like, let's just read some of this stuff. Like, so Gilgamesh, after Enkidu is constructed, he has dreams as well, right? He has dreams of Enkidu, right? So when he speaks to his divine mother, this is the way that this is described. The stars of the heavens appeared above me. Like a rock from the sky, one fell down before me. I lifted it up, but it weighed too much for me. I tried to roll it, but it could not dislodge it. So this is the nightmare that he's having, right? That this rock falls down and he does not have the strength to move it, right? And this is supposed to be Enkidu. The land of Uruk was standing around it. The people were gathered about it. A crowd was milling about before it. The menfolk were thronging around it. Like a babe in arms, they were kissing its feet. Like a wife, I loved it, caressed and embraced it. I lifted it up, set it down at your feet, and you, O mother, you made it my equal. And this is Shamhat quoting to Enkidu the dream that Gilgamesh is relating to his mother, right? And I found that part kind of interesting, right? How it's kind of like it's like a wife, I embrace it, right? There's this kind of like oftentimes you get this kind of love relationship between the two that I don't want to do this like modern, like overly modern thing where like like a lot of like modern readings have tried to like sexualize it and turn it into like a like a gay love affair. I don't think it's that, but it is an objective fact that the Enkidu is often like, and Gilgamesh, it's often just like characterized as the love between a husband and a wife, right? And between a man and a woman, right? And that was whether or not this is just kind of like basic poetic hyperbole or something else. It is there, right? And it is there to be talked about in some way. So ultimately, these dreams are there, and Gilgamesh comes to meet Enkidu, who is kind of let loose essentially into the city of Uruk. I'm not sure if you want to take it from there. So we would be on tablet 2 now.
Yep. So I think the main thing I wanted to read right at the beginning of Tablet 2 is just a final couple lines that for me emphasized what we were talking about with Shamhat earlier and her characterization as not belittled and not evil. So this is the beginning of my translation of Tablet 2. Shamhat took off her robe and divided it so that the wild man also could be clothed. When this was done, and both of them were clothed, she took him by the hand as a goddess might, leading a worshiper into the temple precinct. As if he was a child, she held his hand, and they began their journey. So just those first few lines there, first like her charity in a way to take her clothing and give him part of it, and then took him by the hand as a goddess might. It's like really kind of elevating her in a way with that language. And I thought it was an interesting line, leading as a goddess might, leading a worshiper into the temple precinct as if he was a child. She held his hand. So this beast-like being that's been created by the gods, and she sort of, we know that the whole end of Tablet 1 is kind of like her taming of him or whatever, but now he's all of a sudden a child or childlike, and kind of needs her in a way to help him along into civilized society and this kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, from there, I don't know how much you want to read directly. It's like, everyone in Uruk is really amazed by Enkidu, and he's huge, and like, oh, maybe he and Gilgamesh, should battle it out bare chested or whatever.
Yeah. Besides that, I mean, there's also like a later point where she actually she physically sits him down, right, and she's feeding him, right, like, or rather, she, like the bread and the wine is set before him, and he's not able to eat or drink because and in my text it's like he looks askance, right? He doesn't know what to do with this stuff. And after she teaches him that this is in fact what human beings do, right? We eat food and we drink wine. Near the end, right, when he learns of the fact that, so like, Gilgamesh in the story, he sleeps with the brides of husbands, right, before they get to sleep with their own brides. And Enkidu, upon hearing this, he seems to get very angry, right? Like why is this happening? There's something very unjust here. And he seems to not know much about society, right? He doesn't even know how to eat and drink, but just there's something innately about this thing that most people recognize as wrong, that he knows is wrong as well, right? And I'm just wondering if you had like any thoughts about that. This kind of like innate sense of like natural rights, right? How much of this comes from the society kind of superimposing this upon Enkidu, right? The writer kind of like putting these thoughts into his head, versus, how much of this is a kind of like meditation on, whatever the feelings might have been on, they didn't have the phrase natural rights, but clearly they had a thought, right? They had a thought of like some kind of like preordained rights that everyone had.
Yeah, I don't think I thought about it a ton as I was reading through. Your notes about it were maybe among the first that made me ponder it. So potentially there is that going on here with some kind of idea of natural rights, or even moralizing to a certain extent. To me, again, maybe one of the most interesting things is that this is coming from a fellow human being, at least of a sort. Enkidu to Gilgamesh, or at least in his mind, is thinking, that's not right. Whereas if you look at, again, the Bible, maybe any kind of sense that someone taking, multiple wives, or like my mind went to the story of David with Bathsheba, right? Where, he takes her as his own, and like, then he ends up in this quandary where he has to kill her husband by putting him on the front lines of a battle so that he dies, and he can sort of get away with it, but then he feels guilty over it. But you get the sense that all of that comes either from him internally or from God, kind of like, I don't know, coaxing that out of him. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, like, David goes on and he keeps Bathsheba for a wife, and he sort of, continues on in this vein and whatever. And once Enkidu and Gilgamesh end up brawling, for whatever set of reasons, whether it's simply just this desire to have a showdown and see who's stronger, or maybe Enkidu is harboring some kind of like negative feelings toward Gilgamesh, and like, well, I need to show him, what he's doing isn't right, and I'm the only one who can really stop him, or a combination of all of that. The fact is, once this goes on, the whole trajectory of the text changes, and now the two of them start to focus on like external things and other ventures they could take on together. And so in a way, it like does change Gilgamesh for the better. He begins to cast his gaze out toward bigger, broader things. Potentially now he's still selfish in his motives, right? He thinks to himself, if we go battle Humbaba, whether I lose or win, I'm going down in the history books, right? People are going to remember me. So there's still that, but that was my main set of thoughts, is like, again, this idea of morality may be coming from another somewhat equal being rather than from above with the gods. Yeah.
One thing I want to ask before we finish, so Tablet 2 ends with the two of them. So Enkidu confronts Gilgamesh about this, this practice that he's engaged in. They fight. Gilgamesh wins, and but they become friends. Based on the notes that you sent me, though, it seems as if your text paints Enkidu as the one that is like very enthusiastic about going out into the cedar forest to fight Humbaba, whereas in my text, Gilgamesh is the one that goads Enkidu on, and Enkidu is the one that says, "Listen, you may want to do this, but I know who this creature is, and he might be too ferocious even for us, right?" And even before, like, Enkidu is kind of like saying, like, there's this kind of like terror that that enters him, as if he knows that Gilgamesh is going to ask this thing, right? And as if like it's going to set this chain of events that ultimately ends with Enkidu dying right after the bull of heaven is slain. So in your text, is it Enkidu that is the one that is like enthusiastic about going into the cedar forest, or what? At least in Tablet 2, because that sort of changes later on.
Yeah. No, that is interesting, because now I didn't notice this on the first go round, but I'm on the Andrew George translation, where it says Gilgamesh opened his mouth saying to Enkidu, "Ferocious Humbaba, let us slay him so his power is no more." And yeah, in my text, right before it says Enkidu and Gilgamesh embraced and kissed and took each other by the hand. And then skipping down, Enkidu spoke these words to Gilgamesh: "Humbaba's mouth is fire, his roar the floodwater, his breath is death. Enlil made him guardian of the cedar forest to frighten off the mortal who would venture there, but who would venture there? His mouth is fire." It does this like repetition again. "Helpless is he who enters the cedar forest, but Gilgamesh replied, who is the mortal able to enter heaven? Only the gods can live forever. The life of man is short. What he accomplishes is but the wind." Very Ecclesiastian again there. "Where is the courage that you used to have? Where is the strength? It is Gilgamesh who will venture first into the cedar forest, and you can follow after, crying out, go on, go forward, go on, embrace the danger. You who have fought with lions and wolves, you know what danger is. Where is your courage? If I should fall, my fame will be secure. It was Gilgamesh who fought against Humbaba." So, it's still kind of Gilgamesh who really posits, like, let's actually go do this. But in my version, it is Enkidu who first even brings up Humbaba.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we could, this immediately brings us to Tablet 3. And this to me was like part of the characterization, right? So like, Tablet 2, Gilgamesh, maybe he has like a bunch of testosterone running after winning this fight against, this guy that everybody, is so curious about and seems so powerful. Yeah. But as Tablet 3 starts, and he still seems to be like off of this kind of high, as the text goes on, though, it's really Gilgamesh is the one that becomes fearful, right? He's the one that becomes uncertain in the face of Humbaba, and ultimately, when they actually have him, at a place where they're able to kill Humbaba, Enkidu has to keep telling him over and over again, stop being manipulated by Humbaba. He's just saying these different things to you because, he wants you to spare his life, and then he's going to kill you. So let's just kill him and get it over with, right? So, it's this kind of interesting inversion where, Gilgamesh is the one that becomes frightened, and Enkidu is the one that has to be, like earlier on, like in Tablet 2, or maybe it's Tablet 1, Enkidu is also characterized as the savior of Gilgamesh, right? And that's kind of an interesting phrase to use, right? I mean, it's kind of like savior in what sense? Well, in the physical sense of like he seems to have saved Gilgamesh's life in terms of like not, falling prey to Humbaba's like wiles. But also he becomes like, in a spiritual sense, a savior in terms of just giving him a greater purpose and direction that goes beyond personal fame or just, personal like overindulgence in whatever, right, that he seems to be interested in before meeting Enkidu. But again, like just back to the characterization, like so far, like we get a whole lot of stuff, in the kind of the internal movements of these characters that, you're not going to get in like the first, few pages or the first few chapters of the Odyssey, of the Iliad, which is like really why like I even prefer like, I've always preferred the Aeneid to like the Greek epics, simply because like, the Aeneid sort of starts with, this person that seems to be like a villain, but is not, right? It's kind of like this anti-hero that is, like it's almost, it's almost as if the Aeneid is making a comment on like Roman imperialism, right? And the fact that like everybody wants their own state and their own people. Everybody, every person, every people has a nationalism within it, right? So to say that, Rome deserves this, whereas like, the Etruscans or whoever else do not, it's just, it goes against actual experience and what ought to be human empathy. And we don't get so much of that in the Greek tragedies, and we get a lot more of this even in Gilgamesh than most of these texts. So I'm not sure if you have anything to say about like the next few tablets. They all kind of like come together kind of quickly, right? It's like 3 tablets that are all kind of around confronting Humbaba and their thoughts in the process, right, and the dreams that they have in the process.
Right. Yeah, that's just it. I'll just read a couple interesting lines in my translation. So this is not too far into Tablet 4, and they're venturing on. They're covering a lot of ground every day. Godlike levels of ground, right? And there's comparisons in the text between what an ordinary person would do versus how much they do. So an elevation of them, which we kind of expect. But then there's a series of lines that says, after a time, the oblivion of sleep poured in upon the king, the strongest of all. He slept, but at midnight suddenly awoke, and awakened the companion Enkidu. Did you call out to me just now in the night? Why did I awaken? Was it you that touched me? Was it a god who went through the camp? A dream? What makes my skin creep? I had a dream. I dreamed we were going through a mountain gorge, and a huge mountain fell down on the two of us. We were as little as flies compared to the mountain. So just some interesting phrasing there, and the fact that like he's so confused, when he first wakes up, and then it kind of goes into Enkidu, interpreting the dream in a positive way, and whatever. But I just thought that was some interesting poetic writing, in my translation at least. And then kind of moving along when they're about to get to the cedar forest. There's this section in my translation that says, there was a noise in the sky that spoke and said, 7 terrors are the garments of Humbaba. The aura of Humbaba is the terrors. Helpless is he who enters the cedar forest when the demon wears the 7. Hurry, Humbaba has not put on the 7. He wears but 1. So, we don't know for sure that this is a god or a goddess that's, giving them this tip, but I guess we can assume it. I mean, it's just a noise in the sky that spoke. So maybe it's one of their, parents or just someone else from the realm of the gods. But again, it kind of reminded me of that offspring of silence line from earlier, right? Where like, once again, it's like Enkidu's here, and then just out of nowhere, there's a noise in the sky that speaks to them and gives them some kind of tip that says like, hey, go now, do this now if you're going to win. So it's just another interesting extension of that prior characterization.
Yeah. And I mean, some of these like individual dreams, right? So he has like I think a total of 4 dreams. One thing that struck me is just how kind of like, no matter what the dream was, right, whether it's like, a mountain, right, in your translation, it says that they were like flies next to the mountain, which seems to have like a negative connotation. Whereas in my translation, it's we as flies like flew clean over it. But no matter how kind of like negative the dream sounds, Enkidu always comes back with, what are you so scared of? This is actually a positive, right? And he always puts a positive spin on the dream. So like so far, it's as if, Enkidu is kind of like a little bit of I don't want to call him like a perfect character this far, but there's definitely much more so this feeling of he's the guide, right? He's going to be the one that prevents Gilgamesh from doing all these bad things, which, in some ways it's true. But here, his like his enthusiasm in interpreting these dreams and the way that he interprets them, it's almost as if it's just wishful thinking, right? So like the first like flaws of Enkidu come out, and the dynamic is especially good, right, in terms of like structure and poetry, because on the one hand, well, first of all, like the characterization, right? This over enthusiasm, you start wondering like, okay, what is this about? Is this really an over enthusiasm? Does he truly, feel this way about the dreams? Is this like, does this say something bad about this character? You have that. On the other hand, though, they do ultimately, as we come to see, they do, defeat Humbaba, right? So they do win. So it's as if like Enkidu's interpretations are vindicated and Gilgamesh's fears are, shown to be wrong. But also, this is a series of events that ultimately ends with the bull of heaven being slain later on, and Enkidu has to be killed for it, by the gods. And this like idea of the over enthusiasm, it's still there, right? We don't eliminate it simply by the 2 heroes defeating Humbaba. Like on the surface, Enkidu is vindicated, but digging deeper, there's other functions here going on, and again, very different from most ancient poetry. So those are my. I'm not sure if you had anything else to add about those dreams or what.
Yeah, my other comment in my notes to you was that it's exactly it. There's like this Pollyanna feeling to Enkidu, and part of you wonders like, is there some ulterior motive here? Like, does he want this to keep going because he's the one that was born in the wilds and presumably knows more, but also maybe he lost to Gilgamesh early on, in kind of a more typical ancient writing or poetry. You might be thinking like, does he have a vendetta, right? Is he like somehow like in cahoots with Humbaba at the end of the day to make sure that Gilgamesh gets killed in the midst of this battle, and he can assume power or something? But it's not that trite, and it's not that direct. It really is kind of interesting that he's just more like, no, like together, let's go on and do this. Here's what I think that dream means. And of course the Gilgamesh just listens and is like, yeah, you're probably right. Let's get in there. Let's do this. Yeah. And like wield our axes and whatever. But the thing that struck me though is, I know I keep coming back to it, but like, referencing the Bible in my head, the interpretation of dreams in the Bible and maybe other religious traditions by their prophets is much more varied, right? Some of them are seen positively and like, okay, that's a sign from God that we will be prosperous, or we'll make it through the wilderness and we'll be blessed and whatever. And at other times it's like, no, that's obviously a sign that this particular people group or we will be visited by terror and plague, and there will be problems, and so and so has disobeyed God's will, and so there must be punishment and recompense. Someone has to pay. This particular venture won't be successful. You name it. So there's a lot of both. Whereas here, it's just interesting that it's like every time viewed in a positive way, and even Gilgamesh's mother back when there was that dream eventually was like, no, there will be one who comes to you as a companion, instead of someone's going to rise up to challenge you. This could be a negative thing, right? So every time it gets a positive spin, and like it pushes the narrative along, right? It'd be weird if they just decided to stop this journey, like right on the edge of the cedar forest, and not go battle Humbaba, right? It wouldn't be much of an epic poem, I guess, if they didn't.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's where my mind went, was like the relentless positivity is just sort of different and interesting.
One thing that I was wondering about Humbaba is, we have like all these like character inversions, right? Where Gilgamesh seems to be the one that's brave, but clearly by the time that we get to fighting Humbaba, he has to be convinced by Enkidu that defeat him, right? Stop paying attention to the manipulations. So since we have like all these various inversions and all these like unexpected little tropes cropping up in Gilgamesh, I was trying to find a way to read Humbaba himself, right? To see whether or not there's any inversions in his character, or whether, is he just like some sort of, I don't want to use the word evil, but some sort of like nefarious agent, just like, a bad giant that, they have to fight anyway, or, like is there something like positive about him? Like, does he does say at a certain point that, hey, Enkidu, you're actually betraying me, right? But but what would be the nature of this betrayal? Like, it seems like he was aware of Humbaba before the fight begins, before they confront him. But perhaps I'm just kind of like looking for too much now, because when I was looking up various like interpretations and seeing what people had to say, I can't really find anything that strikes me as, Humbaba is kind of like, not as evil as he's made out to be. The only thing I could say is that near the end, when they in fact defeat Humbaba, there is an interesting part where Enkidu starts to chide Gilgamesh once more, right? So he chides him about wanting to confront Humbaba, so he's too powerful. And then he chides him about being too fearful of Humbaba when Gilgamesh has the various dreams. And he chides him again when, he's about to kill Humbaba, and Gilgamesh hesitates multiple times. And then the last chiding in Tablet 5 is Tablet 5 is so after they slay Humbaba, the way that my translation frames it is, Gilgamesh went trampling through the forest to take resin from the cedars for the table of Enlil. Enkidu opened his mouth to speak, saying to Gilgamesh, "My friend, we have reduced the forest to a wasteland. How shall we answer Enlil in Nippur? In your might you slew the guardian. What was this wrath of yours that you went trampling through the forest?" In the notes that I sent to you, it was like, there's something like that part of the trampling part of the tablet seems to, like, that fragment is missing. But just assuming that the way that Enkidu characterizes it is correct, there seems to be something going on psychologically, right? Where like Gilgamesh is engaged in some kind of overcompensation, right? Where, after being so fearful, he's now unnecessarily just destroying too much, right? It's almost this kind of like, almost like this proto, environmentalist argument almost. Why are you doing this, right? And Gilgamesh himself doesn't seem, he has like a pragmatic answer, right? He wants to like use the wood for his own purposes. But still, like it just struck me as clearly, like psychologically, like there is some kind of like bit of an overcompensation going on in Gilgamesh. I'm not sure if you had like any any responses to that when you read it.
Not necessarily. I guess the only thing that really came to mind for me was just Gilgamesh kind of overstepping the bounds of their victory in a way. Mm-hmm. He's potentially at this point a bit bloodthirsty or just greedy. Like they get this win, and then he's going to just go ahead and this forest is mine now, right? Mm-hmm. We've defeated him. I can take it into my kingdom. I can do with it as I want. And there is this chiding by Enkidu to basically ask him to consider it and maybe leave it as something valuable in and of itself. Let it remain, let it stand. Again, kind of that hearkening back to him being of the wild and perhaps a respect for the forest. And even though we're not explicitly told that he spent time in it, he must have, or he must have at least some awareness of it, because he knows of Humbaba and where this forest is and whatever. So there is this sense that Gilgamesh, even coming back to the idea of great deeds and great works, is maybe seeing the forest now just as a means to an end. This is something we can take, we can repurpose. And Enkidu seems to have some kind of sense that it's a good unto itself and should be kept intact, at least in part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this brings us to Tablet 6, right? So like after this happens, and Gilgamesh and Enkidu are praised in Uruk, Ishtar, right? So this I guess she's the Babylonian goddess of love and of sex, and a few other things, kind of like Aphrodite, right? She's kind of stereotyped as the goddess of love, whereas in fact she's oftentimes also just the goddess of like pure kind of like more kind of like carnal passion. Ishtar though is definitely like a bit more nefarious in many ways than Aphrodite. So she's, she sees this and she wants to marry Gilgamesh. She tries to seduce him, and he rejects her. And the thing that struck me here is, so Shamhat the prostitute is, she's presented in this way where, she's good, right? She educates Enkidu, right? There's nothing that you could say that's really negative about her character in a way that you would, perhaps normally expect, right, for the ancients to say about, loose women or something. But Ishtar definitely has much more of that quality, despite the fact that A, she's not a prostitute, and B, she's actually a goddess. Right. Yeah. And when Gilgamesh, rejects her, there's this, she ultimately goes, I think it's to her father, and she does like this kind of stereotypical thing where she's like, if you don't send down the bull of heaven, I'm going to scream, right? And my screams are going to I think like in some translations, though, like wake up the underworld and, make its way to Uruk and, destroy the people. In other translations, it's just kind of like, the scream's just supposed to be uncomfortable. But she's much more this kind of, stereotyped spurned woman, right? There's not too much complexity to her character, and again, like even in other settings, right, she's just kind of like all around negative, right? She sort of forces her brother into like a Persephone situation, and I enjoy definitely some of the descriptions, right, of that Gilgamesh makes towards Ishtar in explaining why he's rejecting her. Right. And he says, why would I want to take you in marriage? You, a frost that congeals no ice, a slatted door that stays not breeze nor drought, a palace that massacres warriors, an elephant which, and then it's broken, its hoods, pitch that stains the hands of its bearer, a water skin that cuts the hands of its bearer, a boulder that smashes a wall of stone, a battering ram that destroys a wall for the enemy, a shoe that bites the foot of its owner. A shoe that bites the foot of its owner. What bridegroom of yours did endure forever? What brave warrior of yours went up to the heavens? And then he goes into like the stories of like the various lovers that are like turned into wolves, or, you know, so on and so forth. And this actually is like two pages of insults, right? That she just responds to in this kind of crazy fashion.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of interesting description, interesting writing there, and it is kind of a moment of humor in the text.
Yeah,
you know, because I remember chuckling a little bit as I was reading this, and it's just like, wow, he's laying it on thick. You know, he's not going to withhold any potential insult. He's like, basically, I know everything you've done, and so there's no way that this is going to work out, and you're going to tempt me. And she just basically is really angered by the fact he knows the truth and points it all out so succinctly, and then has to fly into this rage to send the bull of heaven down. And then at that point, you made a good point in your notes where there's some language that so here's a second battle now for Gilgamesh and Enkidu to fight together. They've already defeated Humbaba. They've come back to the city victorious. As a result of that, Ishtar wants to be with Gilgamesh. He rejects her. Now they've got a battle of bull of heaven. And they talk about if they combine together, they cannot be easily broken. So again, that kind of Ecclesiastian language that we see in the Bible in that book. And I think I read somewhere, I wish I had it more easily at hand, but in some of the commentary I was reading that that language in historical and ancient writing is quite rare. So it was sort of interesting that it got used here and then separately in the Bible. Again, I wish I had it on hand to expand more on that, but just they do this. They have another victory, some goings back and forth with the bull, but they wrestle with it and they eventually win. By stabbing it, between its shoulder blades and through its head, kind of thing. Yeah, and then from there we end up in this predicament where the gods decide that one of them has to die as recompense for that. So interesting that there was no real repercussions to them taking on Humbaba. Maybe he didn't have any god friends up there that were pissed. But
this is supposed to be like the bull of heaven, right? So there is a kind of like sacred quality. Like I think Humbaba is like has like a divine portion to him. I mean, just like Enkidu, right, and just like Gilgamesh, or semi-divine as well. But like the bull of heaven, like it's supposed to like represent something kind of like more holy. But then you just wonder, like, well, how is it able to just kind of run, kind of like crazy through a town and, just kind of arbitrarily kill people, right? Well, again, like we're going to get into like later on with the Bible, how, there's this kind of conflict between what are the gods, do these gods have any real rules, right? Do these gods, do they simply engender chaos, right? Like how do you compare these kinds of gods to like a like monotheistic god, right? Yeah. But I guess that's the only thing I can think of. There's sort of like this quality to this bull that he's not supposed to be slain in any way by anybody that's like kind of like living world, right? By any mortals, and they are both mortals, even if semi-divine.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things I pointed out in my notes was that when the bull comes down, an awful lot of people do die. I guess whether we're going to assume it's from the imprints of its hooves in the ground or so that these pits open up basically, and men by the hundreds fall into them and die. And it's just mentioned and then brushed by. There's no mourning over it. There's no moral claims about whether that's right or wrong. It just occurs, and then we're sort of left with the rest of what goes on, where eventually Enkidu and Gilgamesh kill the bull. So it made me wonder a bit about ancient attitudes, and attitudes that have persisted in humanity, certainly up through the modern age here, where there's this, your focus is over here on this great battle and this story you're being told and these larger than life figures who are dueling it out, and the common people who just happen to sort of be carnage and collateral on the side. Who really cares? You know, we don't, none of their names are told to us. We don't know anything about their lives. They're just citizens of Uruk. And so I think in a lot of ancient writing, you do get this pretty strong sense of the great man or great person theory of history. It's like, well, this is what matters. This is what we're going to tell you about. Anything else that happened along the way, not really that important, just kind of a sideshow. And so to me, this felt like another instance of that. And through no fault of their own, people by the hundreds are just dying in a pretty violent way. So I don't know if you had any other thoughts to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, and also through no fault of their own, you know, like Enkidu has to die, right? I mean, like in that situation, when this thing is loosed upon the world, you as a king, right, and you as like the friend of the king, you know, you do have a specific role to play, just like gods have a specific role to play. You know, these people have a specific role to play. They don't exactly know the provenance of this bull necessarily. They don't exactly know that this is forbidden. They just know that, you know, a bunch of people died. These are my subjects, and we need to deal with it, right? So, you know, so he's sort of, you know, you have like the whims of one goddess, then you have the whims of the other gods coming into play as well, right? Saying that, you know, her whims, and that's the odd part. I mean, like Ishtar's whims in other myths, they do get punished, right? When she wants to sort of like wage war against her sister, that is considered, you know, unacceptable to the gods, right? So therefore, you know, her brother is punished, and so on and so forth. But here, you know, I guess because these are, you know, these are whims that involve, you know, non-gods, right? Just ordinary mortals. They're not necessarily punished in any way, right? It's just kind of like, you know, imagine like, you know, like a bunch of like sibling rivalries up top where nobody's allowed to, you know, sort of like step on each other's toes too much. And yet, you know, everything below it is essentially playthings for you, right? As gods. So, yeah, I don't really have much to say about the bull, but yeah, so we're at the point, right, where the gods decide that in tablet, what is it, tablet 7, right? So tablet 7 and 8, Enkidu is dying, and ultimately he dies, and there's this kind of, you know, funeral service for him. And we have Gilgamesh's mourning about that. Right. I'm not sure if you have this in your version of the epic, but I keep coming across this like reference to a famous line where Gilgamesh ultimately does not go away from Enkidu's corpse until he finds a maggot, you know, crawling out of his nose. But I couldn't actually find it in my text. I'm not sure if it appeared in your translation or what.
Real quick, let me scan for it. I vaguely remember something like that. Hold on. Okay. So this would be in tablet 7, right?
It could even be in 8, right, where the death actually occurs. But I mean, anyway, it's not important. You know, it's just interesting how like just a lot of stuff, right, that I'm looking for, right, when I'm like, sometimes even when I'm like listening to like some lectures about this stuff, they're referencing things that I know that in my version simply did not happen, or did not happen in the way that they're being presented, right? So
yeah, interesting. I don't see those lines in my translation either, so okay.
Yeah. But just to get back to, I guess, Shamhat, right? So, Enkidu is dying, and he's he's sort of kind of lashing out against the world, and he when he's like damning the world, he ultimately comes to Shamhat. So he damns the hunter, the trapper, right? Which ultimately, and that's kind of the weird part. The trapper exists, and the trapper is the one that introduces ultimately, Gilgamesh to this entity, right? Like the trapper tells Gilgamesh, "Hey, there's this wild man. Like, what am I supposed to do about him?" Right? And this is, he's never damning Gilgamesh, right? He's never damning the fact that they came into contact, but he's damning the person that brought them into contact, right? Right. And then he's coming to Shamhat, right? So after he had cursed the hunter to his heart's content, he decided also to curse Shamhat, the harlot. "Come, Shamhat, I will fix your destiny, a doom to endure for all eternity. I will curse you with a mighty curse. My curse shall afflict you now and forthwith. A home to delight in you shall not acquire, never to reside in the midst of a family. In the young women's chamber you shall not sit. Your finest garment the ground shall not defile. Your festive gown the drunkard shall stain in the dirt. A household full of beauty you shall never acquire. For your home shall serve a potter's clay pit. You shall not have neither bedroom nor family shrine nor hearth. No bed, chair, or table that people take pride in shall be found in your chamber. The couch you delight in shall be a hard bench. The dust of the crossroads shall be where you sit. A field of ruins shall be where you sleep. The shade of the rampart shall be where you stand. Thorn and briar shall skin your feet. Drunk and sober shall strike your cheek. Wives shall be plaintive and bring claims against you. The roof of your house no builder shall plaster. In your chamber shall roost an owl." So he's saying, like, you weakened me, right? You hurt me. This is what you did to me, right? And then Shamash, right, the goddess, hears this. "O Enkidu, I curse Shamhat the harlot, who fed you bread that was fit for a god, and poured you ale that was fit for a king, who clothed you in a splendid garment, and gave you as companion the handsome Gilgamesh." So, like, although there's no like pushback against the other damning that he does, like, Shamhat, again, like she's this interesting stand in a way also now for like the trapper as well. And she's this kind of like odd, like fulcrum, like from much of the text, right? Which is, again, like you mentioned earlier, like when she's sort of like compared like to a goddess, like she's given, a position that you would never expect, right? This continues, and now Gilgamesh, your friend and your brother, will lay you out in a magnificent bed. On a bed of honor he will lay you out. He will place you on his left on a seat of repose. The rulers of the underworld will all kiss your feet. When Enkidu realizes, I'm just being kind of, I guess, immature about this, I'm just lashing out, he takes back his curse, but the curse that he takes back, he replaces it with something that is just kind of, it's odd in the sense that it speaks to a little bit of his kind of like sense of like natural rights, like when we mentioned earlier, like when the text started, right, when he was very, angry at the fact that Gilgamesh was, tyrannizing, the grooms and the brides of these grooms. Here you have like a little bit of an inversion of this. So when he addresses Shamhat again, this is what Enkidu says: "My mouth that cursed you shall bless you as well. Governors shall love you, and noblemen too. At 1 league off, men shall slap their thighs. At 2 leagues off, they shall shake out their hair. No soldier shall be slow to drop his belt for you. Obsidian he shall give you, lapis lazuli and gold. Earrings of gold shall be what he gives you. Ishtar, the ablest of gods." So Ishtar is being praised, right? The goddess that, just completely, lost her mind here. "Ishtar, the ablest of gods, shall gain you entrance. to the man whose home is secure and wealth heaped high. For you, his wife shall be deserted, though mother of 7. Right. So it's like, okay, so he has this like sense of natural rights at the beginning where this like interference with this like burgeoning family that Gilgamesh is doing, that's not right. But in this case, maybe it's because of the position of this prostitute, or maybe it's like something else, or maybe it's because like just being in society, his sense of what natural rights are has been changed. He's like almost like wishing that she would go and break apart families in some ways, right? Or maybe like in the past, like, wealthy men simply go to prostitutes and that's simply what they did. And families did not get broken up in the process. But I just found that interesting in light of what he said earlier, right? When he first came into, this sense of like innate right and wrong. So anyway, that was my response to this kind of like dying and funeral scene for Enkidu.
Yeah. I don't think I've got a lot to add there if we want to move on toward Gilgamesh's mourning and wandering in Tablet 9.
And maybe you have something to say about the funeral. I didn't write much down about the funeral itself.
Let me just look at my notes. I don't know that I really did. I think I highlighted a couple of the same lines you did, but I don't have much else there. I really kind of moved on to Tablet 9. So
I mean, and maybe we could sort of say that here, like we skipped over some tablets a little bit. They move the plot along, but there are parts in the text where you could imagine maybe like people coming together, maybe some of this was like sung, maybe it was like part of an oral tradition as well, besides also being written down. Maybe it was this text was part of like some festivities. So perhaps, it was even like acted out in some ways, but there's definitely like a little bit, like of slack too. Like I think like some of the funeral scene is has a bit of slack. Some of the, earlier tablets that we kind of glossed over. I feel like if we don't have too much to say, it just speaks to a little bit of fat in the text, right? I don't want people to simply have the impression that this is, a great poem on par with anything else that we could, offer up in terms of modern writing or even like pre-modern writing, because that's not necessarily the case. I think it is telling that we do have to gloss over a little bit. So yeah, I mean, maybe you could take it away then from like his wanderings, right? So he goes off like in a search for immortality after this, right? And he kind of like perpetuates his own mourning, right? Even when he wanders, right? He has like, he kind of like almost like in a homage to his friend, he's like trapping animals, right? And he's wearing their skins, and he looks like, and he's I think kind of like made to look kind of silly and wild, right? And like the gods that speak to him, they're like sort of like, like, what are you doing? Is this really your life at this point?
Yeah, that is true. He definitely has a little bit of just a crisis, personal crisis, and it's kind of odd, a little bit of a break from his normal character. And let's see, where do we want to pick this up? I had one interesting line toward the beginning of Tablet 9. I'm going to try to see if there's a parallel to it in the Andrew George translation here.
Maybe if you read it, because I have it open. If you read it, maybe I could find it.
Okay, so I'll pick up a couple lines beforehand. So he's going toward the mountain passes to begin this journey, and it says, "At night in the mountain passes there were lions, and Gilgamesh was afraid, and entered afraid into the moonlit mountain passes, praying to Sin, the moon god. Hear my prayer and save me as I enter into the passes where there are lions. At night, when he lay down to sleep, there were confusions of dreams, and in the dreams, confusions of noises, confusions of swords, daggers, axes. An adversary gloried over him in struggle, and in the dream, who knows who won?" So it's just, I thought, really interesting couplet there. an adversary gloried over him in struggle, and in the dream, who knows who won. It's just, it's almost as like, without Enkidu there to interpret his dreams for him, he doesn't even know what went on anymore.
Yeah.
Not only,
That's a good point.
not only does he not know how to interpret it, he's just not even sure what happened. And so it's a nice poetic technique or literary technique there. Again, we're talking about some of the strength of characterization here in this epic poem compared to some others. And those lines were a highlight for me with that and Gilgamesh's evolving character here. Did you find any lines in the Andrew George that seemed to parallel those?
A little bit, although, like, do you have like the Scorpion men in your who sort of tell him like, what you seek, do not go further, and he like ignores their. I don't have that exactly.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've got the Scorpion beings because, like, in the Andrew George, it says the text of Tablet 9 resumes, to Mashu's twin mountains he came. And so right after that, and in the dream, who knows who won line, it says Gilgamesh came to the mountain called Mashu. So, it's somewhere in there, but I don't see anything in the Andrew George translation here that is equivalent to that lack of a understanding of his dream. So
I'm not sure if this is before or after in yours, but Shamash watches him, and just says, "Oh Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? The life that you seek, you never will find." Right. And like part of the life is like he's walking around, he's saying, "I am afraid of death." Right. So this is kind of like I don't want to say it's totally new, but he shows both bravery as well as like just kind of a hesitation earlier. But at this point, after his friend dies, like he does have the sense that, what is all of this for, right? If this is how it ends. And, Shamash and also others tell him, this thing that you're trying to obviate, right? Death, right? It's just meaningless, right? That is the thing that is vanity. That is the thing that you cannot get, right? And so he ultimately goes on and he finds this, not really a god, but I guess like at some point, there's a cult that develops around Uta Napishti, technically not a god, right? Not a deity, but still was granted immortality by the gods in exchange for rendering a service, which is like saving humanity as well as animals, right, from the Great Flood, right? So maybe we could just get to his coming across Urinapishti, and he tells Gilgamesh about, like, okay, so you want to know how I became immortal, this is how, right? And he gives the story of the flood, and we should probably just read that in full, right? Like it's called Tablet 10 at the edge of the world, because this is the point where he like if we're gonna go through the Bible, right? Like to just see some of the similarities, right, between the story of the flood there and what Urinapishti relates to Gilgamesh. So this is. And, Gilgamesh says, like, I just cannot bear what happened to my friend. And he keeps like badgering Urinapishti for an answer. Right. And this story, right, that supposedly like nobody else was supposed to know. Right. This is not information that is supposed to be willingly shared with other mortals, but he does so anyway. And this is what. This is what Urinapishti says. So I'm not sure if you have an analog, but this is around like line 270 or so in Tablet 10 in my version. Said Urinapishti to him, to Gilgamesh, "Why, Gilgamesh, do you ever chase sorrow? You who are a mix of God's flesh and human, whom the gods did fashion like your father and mother. Did they ever, Gilgamesh, build a palace for the fool? Place a throne in the council and tell him sit. The fool gets leftover yeast instead of fresh ghee. bran and grist instead of best flour. He is clad in a rag instead of fine garments. Instead of a belt, he is girt with old rope. Because he has no advisors to guide him, his affairs lack counsel. Now consider your support. If Gilgamesh, the temples of the gods have no provisioner, the temples of the goddesses. Enkidu, indeed, they took to his doom. But you toiled away, and what did you achieve? You exhaust yourself with ceaseless toil. You fill your sinews with sorrow, bringing forward the end of your days. Man is snapped off like a reed in a canebrake. The comely young man, the pretty young woman, all too soon in their prime, death abducts them. No one at all sees death. No one at all sees the face of death. No one at all hears the voice of death. Death so savage who hacks men down. Ever do we build our households, ever do we make our nests, ever do brothers divide their inheritance, ever do feuds arise in the land. Ever the river has risen and brought us the flood, the mayfly floating on the water, on the face of the sun its countenance gazes, then all of a sudden nothing is there. The abducted and the dead alike is their lot. But never was drawn the likeness of death. Never in the land did the dead greet a man. The Anunnaki, the great gods, held an assembly. Mamira, maker of destiny, fixed fates with them. Both death and life they did establish, but the day of death they do not disclose. Reminds me of that line from the Avid Brothers, that song "Die, Die, Die," right? Where you're never supposed to know that the day of death, right? And they go into their like poetic passages as far as like what happens like if you were to know this. So yeah, and the next one is when you get is where we get the story of the Great Flood. I'm not sure if you have anything to say about those passages, or if you want to like get straight to the flood or what.
Yeah, I've got a couple things. So first of all, I know I'm throwing it back for a second here, but in the Wanderings in Tablet 9, just in my version, some of my favorite lines I wanted to point out, because these feel among the most modern of anything I read. And so this is when he's like following the path of the sun at night through the mountain passes and everything's pitch black. Right. So he's going on and on and on. And it says, just then at the end of the 9th league, just once, the rough tongue of the north wind licked at his face. It was like the tongue of a wild bull or a lion. He struggled on through darkness, trying to breathe. The darkness pressed in upon him, both nothing and something. After he struggled, blind, his companionless way, through 11 leagues of the darkness, nothing at all, and something ahead of him, a league ahead, a little light, a grayness began to show. So I'll stop there, but I love those lines because it reminded me like of Wallace Stevens almost in a way, right? Some of these little inversions, both nothing and something. The enjambment on it is also interesting and good. So anyway, just pointing out some good and interesting writing from David Ferry there. Nice work, David Ferry, on some interesting translation. And then as you were reading through that passage you just did, where he's talking to Utanapishti, I did find this line about a worm dropping out of Enkidu's nose that you asked about earlier. So it's making a late game appearance here. It's when Gilgamesh is talking to him and talking, like recapping their adventures together.
I see it too. Now I see it too again. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see it? So he just says,
I expected to see it during the funeral scene, but I guess it wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, mine says, I saw the worm drop out of Enkidu's nose. Must I die too? Must I too be like that? But then, I actually prefer a lot of the lines and think they're better in the Andrew George version that you just read, with all of this, like, once again, Ecclesiastian all is vanity kind of mindset here as he's kind of wrapping up. Utanapishti's giving these comments to Gilgamesh, but I'll just read from my translation how it's written and how it sounds. You who were born the son of a goddess mother, why do you grieve because of a mortal father? How long does a building stand before it falls? How long does a contract last? How long will brothers share the inheritance before they quarrel? How long does hatred, for that matter, last? Time after time, the river has risen and flooded. The insect leaves the cocoon to live but a minute. How long is the eye able to look at the sun? From the very beginning, nothing at all has lasted. See how the dead and the sleeping resemble each other. Seen together, they are the image of death. The simple man and the ruler resemble each other. The face of the one will darken like that of the other. And then the last few lines about Mamita, mother goddess, and everything else. So it's way pared down in my version. You know, there's so much more language in yours that you just read that I think kind of really gives this section more life. But at any rate, still some interesting, metaphors there and phrasing of, some of life's vanity.
Yeah, the earlier passages that you read from when he's wandering about and the wind is at him and it's nothingness. Here when you're about to get to that part, there's ellipses and broken fragments, I guess. So this wasn't put in here, although if it was, I probably would have noticed it at some point. Yeah, but I mean, like tons of very modern writing, especially like when we get like closer and closer to the end of the book. It's like this. At the beginning, a lot of this is kind of the modernity is more kind of structural. It's more in the characterization. Here, we get that those kinds of kind of like more modern sort of biblical ideas. And, it's one of those things where like I'm just always fascinated by a lot of Asian writing, if only for the fact that, these are people from thousands of years ago. And, as alien as many of those societies seem, I mean, these are, identical concerns. These are things that are felt in very similar ways. So that's always interesting.
Right. You want to get onto the flood narrative here? Yeah.
And actually, we could do some of this reading, but in the video that I was like one of the videos that I watched, right, that you watched as well. Let me just do a screen share here. He goes into the lecturer is at a Christian college. He starts to read those passages, right? To like the lecture is about the fact that there's these similarities between the Bible and let me just
Gilgamesh,
see. Yeah. So let's just share that now. Yeah. So he's going to go through this text and he's going to read from it and he's going to draw some comparisons and ultimately just say some things about the gods and the nature of the gods and contrast it with the Bible, which you and I we both used to be Christians and we come from, I guess, a bit of a similar tradition that he does, but I guess we no longer agree with much of this assessment. But let's see. And this is going to be about like 11 minutes. So let's just stick through it here.
And now we have this description, and this is this description of the flood itself. When the first light of dawn, a black cloud came from the horizon. It thundered within where Adad, lord of the storm, was riding. In front over hill and plain, Shalut and Hanesh, heralds of the storm, led on. Then the gods of the abyss rose up. Nergal pulled out the dams of the nether waters, water from below. Ninurta, the warlord, threw down the dikes, and the 7 judges of hell, the Anaki, raised their torches, lighting the land with livid flame. A stupor of despair went up to heaven. When the god of the storm turned daylight to darkness, when he smashed the land like a cup. One whole day the tempest raged, gathering fury as it went. It poured over the people like the tides of battle. A man could not see his brother, nor the people be seen from heaven. Even the gods were terrified at the flood. They fled to the highest heaven, the firmament of Amnu. They crouched against the walls, cowering like curs. Then Ishtar, the sweet-voiced queen of heaven, cried out like a woman in travail. Alas, the days of old are turned to dust because I commanded evil. Why did I command this evil in the council of all the gods? I commanded wars to destroy the people, but are they not my people? For I brought them forth now like the spawn of fish. They float in the ocean. The great gods of heaven and of hell wept. They covered their mouths. So here we have the flood, which terrifies even the gods and causes them this great sense of regret. All right, one more paragraph. You're doing this okay? Bearing with me here? All right. For 6 days and 6 nights the winds blew. Torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed the world. Tempest and flood raged together like warring hosts. When the 7th day dawned, the storm from the south subsided. The sea grew calm, the flood was stilled. I looked at the face of the world, and there was silence. All mankind was turned to clay. The surface of the sea stretched as flat as a rooftop. I opened a hatch, and the light fell on my face. Then I bowed low, I sat down, I wept. The tears streamed down my face, for on every side was the waste of water. I looked for land in vain, but 14 leagues distant there appeared a mountain, and there the boat grounded on the mountain of Nisir. The boat held fast. She held fast and did not budge, which he then repeats about 8 times. So I'll drop down. When the 7th day dawned, I loosed a dove and let her go. She flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. Then I loosed a swallow, and she flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. I loosed a raven. She saw that the waters had retreated. She ate, she flew around, she cawed, she did not come back. Then I threw everything open to the 4 winds. I made a sacrifice and poured out a libation on the mountaintop. 7 and again 7 cauldrons I set up on their stands. I heaped up wood and cane and cedar and myrtle. When the gods smelled the sweet savor, they gathered like flies over the sacrifice. Remember, it's quid pro quo worship. Sacrifices feed the gods. Then at last Ishtar also came. She lifted her necklace with the jewels of heaven that once Anu had made to please her. O you gods here present, by the lapis lazuli around my neck, I shall remember these days as I remember the jewels of my throat. These last days I shall not forget. Let all the gods gather around the sacrifice, except Enlil. He shall not approach this offering, for without reflection he brought the flood. He consigned my people to destruction. And then the text goes on. So, any casual reader of that has to be impressed that there are these points where we have this kind of similarity between the two. You also have to be impressed, I think, with the fact that there are some conspicuous and obvious differences, aren't there? And so it is an interesting kind of parallel in which we have both those things which seem to be somewhat similar and yet some very striking and significant points of difference. The scholar who wrote the intro to this book, which is, by the way, a very fine treatment, I don't know that he's coming at all from a Christian perspective, but he summarizes at one point the considerable similarities but also differences between these two accounts. And I can't do better than just kind of summarize what he says here. But he says, he notes this first of all, in the biblical story, the same machinery is used. The building of the boat, the entry of the animals, the flood, the loosing of birds, the sacrifice. But while the God who remembered Noah, biblical account, lives in awful isolation, our scholar says, in the Assyrian, as in the Sumerian stories, we are still in the world of factious, flustered, and fallible deities. And that is the first great difference that we probably want to notice, is that while the Gilgamesh account gives us, at least in terms of the factual scenario, these striking similarities, notice the difference in the way the supernatural is portrayed to us. In the Gilgamesh epic, you've got these same gods who are at each other's throats. They're squabbling, they're factious, they're jealous, they're immoral, and so on. And there's a great, wonderful, holy dignity about the God of the Bible who brings this judgment to bear. He goes on and says, there's a real danger that the powers of chaos and destruction will get out of hand. Things do indeed go too far. The gods are shocked by the results of their own action, but nothing shows more strikingly the difference in outlook and purpose than the conclusion. In place of God's solemn pledge to Noah, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, night and day shall not cease, he says, in contrast, there is the nauseating picture of God swarming like flies over the sacrifice. And that again becomes one of the most striking distinctions. Here on the one hand is God who is in perfect control of what's happening, not in any sense dependent on humanity, nor terrified or intimidated by the flood that has been unleashed. But in the Gilgamesh epic, these gods themselves are on the run at the uncontrolled powers that have been unleashed by their own hands. Instead of the rainbow pledge, God promising to Noah this continuity that would continue now, which we continue to enjoy, there is only Ishtar fingering her necklace and exclaiming that she will not forget these days. But this is the word of the most notoriously faithless of the gods. Here's Ishtar giving some little hint that, oh, this was so bad, we better not let this happen again. But who can trust her, you see? Whereas the great God, the holy God of Noah's experience, makes this solemn promise that even though there's been this catastrophe, from now on, like clockwork, this cosmology is going to operate and be something we can depend on. So too the immortality and semi-divine status which Utnapishtim win for themselves and their families is very different from the solemn covenant of the Bible between God and the still entirely human Noah. Noah's not given immortality. He's still a human being and treated that way in the biblical account, as you know. And so the Mesopotamian myth, he concludes, leaves the people in a state of anxiety lest there be some catastrophe like this that would happen again. There's no sense that now they can rest securely on a kind of firm foundation of God's providential care of the universe. That's the way Gilgamesh leaves it. And immortality for Gilgamesh is simply the legacy that a man can leave for himself by building great monuments with his name all over them and then putting his grave somehow inside those monuments. But the biblical account leaves us with something so much more grand, so much more befitting the great dignity of God himself and the dignity that he gives to us, because there is this sense in which God now has accomplished his purpose and placed us in this situation of, at least within the created order, a kind of security. So again, as I'm kind of reaching a conclusion here, what do we learn from this? We learn that there is this striking correlation of a biblical account. This certainly doesn't prove necessarily that a deluge happened, but it is very interesting. We see that there's these striking similarities, but we also see that at the deepest level, these are two different stories. That one of the stories is simply the speculations of the human imagination trying to make sense out of a catastrophe, and at best coming up with ambiguous and unsatisfying solutions and answers. And on the other hand, we have divine revelation, which gives us the same great catastrophe, but we come out the other end of the tube in this one with this deep, deep sense that God is to be trusted, that God, even in the tumultuous storms of life, as bad as they may be, is the one who places us in an ark of protection, a guarded place, a place of security in the midst of what may be, the chaos around us. And that motif runs through the scriptures of God placing us in that ordered, protected kind of area and keeping us safe, overshadowing us, if you will, even in the midst of the catastrophes that may befall us elsewhere.
Yeah, so just to add a little bit to what you said, the god Enlil in Gilgamesh, as this is being related, depending on what myth you read, it could be phrased a little bit differently, but he was just kind of upset that, all the people were making too much noise, right? So his solution to that was, I'm going to send a great flood and kill all of them because I hate this noise. And eventually, some gods, they feel bad for people, and they tell Uranapishti, hey, if you want to save the world, this is what you do, right? And eventually he gets granted immortality for the service. So to take the Christian perspective on this, I guess naturally would be one of, monotheism is progressive, right? And I guess it is progressive in the sense that, monotheism by itself will probably include more people under its umbrella, right, than a typical, polytheistic religion. But, I just have issues with the way that, a lot of the phrasing and the framing, it's just, it's done in a way that's just way too self-serving, and it glosses over what is actually said in Genesis, right? What Noah is told, and also how, the Bible characterizes God's feelings and decisions before the flood, during the flood, after the flood. I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that, or if you want to just read that part of Genesis that would sort of that's interesting. He's a Christian lecturer, but you read Genesis and it kind of refutes everything that he's saying, right? And it shows kind of how dishonest a lot of that framing is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could definitely read the passages in Genesis just to frame it up. And why don't we do that, and then we can comment more, because of course I have a few things to say about that exact same idea in terms of how many logical leaps we decide to make without any justification to eventually get to a totally different interpretation of roughly the same kind of mythology. So
yeah, and you said you went to a Christian college, right, in the notes. So you said you sat through these kinds of things all the time, right? This is a very common thing that happens, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it is. And within church as well, of course, right? This doesn't strike me as all that different from a typical Sunday sermon, where, it might be viewed as kind of interesting to relate the Bible to some other ancient text. And let's see how the Bible is clearly correct and superior while this other text is just misguided. That happens a lot, and I think it's kind of just a bit of a dishonest effort to grasp at some kind of intellectualism or something on behalf of the Bible and Christianity. But yeah, then within my my New Testament and Old Testament classes in college, same kind of idea. These kind of lectures where you do some kind of hermeneutical breakdown on a passage of the Bible, and maybe a couple different languages, and how the Greek looks versus how the Hebrew looks, et cetera, and then eventually get some kind of consensus on the meaning of the passage, and make all kinds of justifications about it. So now with reading this, you have the KJV, right? King James. Yeah. So if you want to read that, because I don't have that on hand, I've got
I just have it open here. Yeah.
New International Version, which is again kind of more streamlined and modernized. So if you want to do the KJV, then go for it.
Yeah, we would never read something like this on the stream. we only read the King James here.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a Genesis 6. And let's just compare his framing with what the Bible actually says. So it's subtitled here, Wickedness of Mankind. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and that they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Right? So, so far, just a couple of things that are alarming to me. So if we want to say that the gods of Babylonia are, chaotic, and they don't necessarily have clear-cut, preordained reasons, right? In the sense that people know what the rules are, right? Like his main objection, it seems to me, is that, look, the gods of Babylonia and the people of Babylonia, there's this disconnect between what the gods do and what people know to be the rules or know not to be the rules. And that's a problem, right? At a minimum, human beings need to be able to say that I know what God wants, and I could either be, in God's favor, or I could fall out of favor. And there is, a reward for being in favor and a punishment for falling out of favor. But so far, there's this kind of generic statement, right, that men have become evil, but these are people that God has created. And actually later on in Genesis, right after the flood is over, he says essentially, I'm not going to do this again, because from the start, man's imagination is evil, right? This is simply the way that things are. This is how I created them. So, we don't know exactly. Yeah. Like so far in Genesis, right, there is no sense that people know that the punishment for evil, which is, again, never really defined, is going to be this kind of flood. And also, interestingly enough, he also wants to punish the animals, right? And right. This idea of animals experiencing evil or behaving in evil ways, that's a problem in and of itself. But in my Bible, which is like a study Bible, there's a lot of commentary about some of the specific passages. And when we get to this part, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart, the biggest commentary on this page is about this phrase, right? The commentator wants to impress upon you that actually God in no circumstance would ever actually repent doing anything, because God has to be perfect. So the way that this phrase is explained away is as follows. Repented does not imply that God made a mistake in his dealings with men, but rather indicates the change in divine direction resulting from the actions of man. So it's not so much that God did anything wrong, it's that the divine direction itself changes based on the actions of people, right? Which is I guess you could, justify theology in any way that you want by, doing this kind of Gad of the Gops ad hoc explanation, but that's all it is. It's just ad hoc bullshit, right? It's here's what the Bible states. I have no way of, finding comfort in this. So, let me just make something up, right? And even this is the way that it's phrased. It's an what is it? Anthropopathism, right? A human emotion applied to God, right? Describing the pain that is caused God by the destructiveness of his creatures, right? And later on, like, in Genesis, it says, I will destroy them because it repenteth me that I have made them, right? It grieved him at his heart, right? This, no way does this strike me as something that God himself would in fact feel if you have a perfect being. It strikes me a lot more as this is what a human being is writing, creating a book that, tries to explain God in human terms. But, after the fact, of course, you could say that, well, because it's a human description, it can't capture, the fullness, right, and the comprehensive nature, of what God in fact believes. But, so far, I think the most important point is I don't see any rules that were laid down that suggest that this is in fact how the world should end. Like, to me, this is not any more or less arbitrary than Enlil saying, people are too noisy, I want to do away with them, right? And because this is a monotheistic religion, you don't have other gods that come into the picture and tell Enlil, how could you do this? This is just insane. Why? Like, can't you see that this is evil? Instead, since you have one God, what naturally happens? Oh, it's God arguing with himself. Saying, I'm not going to do this again. We have literally a stand-in for polytheism here, within monotheism, because, this is the only way that, human beings can interpret such a thing. And I mean, and this is such a, it's such a human document to begin with. And, in both cases. Yeah. I mean, like, do you have anything to say, like, so far about, like, the passages here or what?
No, I think you summed it up well. And yeah, obviously with Bruscore, the lecturer there, I don't know this for sure, but I feel pretty comfortable assuming that his lecture is coming from also a point of assumption that this literally happened, that the flood took place, which there's no geological evidence that it did. So the justification game is going to run very deep. You also are certainly seeing, like, this is Genesis 6, and in Genesis 1, we had the creation of mankind. So we've still got thousands upon thousands of pages left in the Bible. I mean, we're about 20 pages in, and God's got to have a redo. So not very impressive from that standpoint. And it's just, there's so many different avenues we could go down in terms of the messiness of the justifications and the theology and whatever, that I think it'd probably get kind of boring, because people can search these things out for themselves or just kind of intuit it, from reading. But I guess we'll get into the, do you want to read through the whole actual, arc setup?
I'll skip around a little bit, if only because, like, I mean, this is very similar to what's in Gilgamesh, right? Like, we have, this is clearly taken from Gilgamesh, right? It's not, a lot of it is like literally verbatim. So, that part is not deniable. Just skipping ahead to verse 13 in chapter 6. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And the irony, of course, is that, if you want to say that there was like violence then, right, and there was evil in men's hearts, simply on account of like a total loss of faith right now today, right? I think God would have to also say that even if we've reduced violence through like, mediation in the state, we have evil in the sense that a total loss of faith, right? So, why isn't this meant to happen again? Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Room shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within, and within this pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof. With lower, second, and third story shalt thou make it. So, and this is also similar to Gilgamesh, right? We have a description of the ship, the multiple stories, the fact that it's measured in cubits of a similar size. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee, right? Again, similar to Uranapishti, right? You're going to come into the ark and we're going to save you and you're going to repropagate the race. So animals are brought in again, just like in Gilgamesh. So the only thing that I would say also about like the specifics of the flood is Noah then releases birds, right? The first one is, what is it? He first set out a raven.
A raven
he sends
first.
out a dove, and then
a dove again.
And then a dove again, yeah. And I think the dove is the first one in Gilgamesh, and the raven is the last. But the point is, it's like, we have the same set of birds, and
there's a sparrow in Gilgamesh as well.
Oh yeah, there's a sparrow there as well.
Yeah.
And then after the flood goes on and on, the flood abates, and God tells Noah about the specifics of this covenant. And God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be set in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature and all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all the flesh that is upon the earth." And before that, there was like something else that I thought was very revealing and just kind of contradicted what he had to say. What was it? Before that, after Noah builds the altar, the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Right. So nothing substantively has changed, right, from after Genesis, when Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden, until now. I mean, you killed all these other people, but the nature of what human beings are, which in this framing is evil, right? This is from the start of the imagination. This is from youth, right? This is from the beginning and to the end. So when we talk about the rules, right, even if we accept that there's a different level of chaos between this God and the Babylonian gods, there doesn't seem to be, that much of a difference when it comes to the rules. I mean, if you're going to say that you're going to send this flood because of this mass evil, but then you don't do anything to change the nature, and then just arbitrarily say, I'll never do this thing again just because, and then repeat the same claim that you made at the beginning to first justify the flood, that's not a rational argument, right? But the Christian has to come back and say, well, again, God is comprehensive. We only get a little bit into the logic behind it all, but the logic as it's presented literally, right? The rules, and the rules that we can objectively know, these are not the rules that you dream up in your head. These are the rules in the Bible. But the rules in the Bible seem to suggest that we have an arbitrary flood, and nothing substantively has changed about people after the flood, except you simply depopulated them. And interestingly enough, like when the gods, come together and they condemn Enlil for doing what he did, they say something like, well, if you thought there were some bad people or some noisy people, you could have sent some lions, right, to depopulate them. Or you could have done some sort of like minor, environmental damage that would have depopulated them. You didn't have to kill all of them. And oddly enough, for all the criticism that he would have of the Babylonian gods, that applies in the same way. I mean, this idea of just like slightly depopulating them for the purpose of making them less noisy, it's the same exact reason that you would apply here, right? I mean, there is no difference as far as I can tell.
Yeah, there's really not. I mean, you summed it up well. There's so many different ways that you could approach it and say kind of the exact same thing. But definitely one of, a couple of the major things that I've, thought, in rereading this is like, number one, first of all, Noah's the chosen one. Noah gets picked and he's blameless before God. How is that possible? Mm-hmm. I mean, if he's a human, if he's a man like any other man that's apparently so, despicable now, mm-hmm. And his imagination, like any other imagination, is corrupt from youth, so that's not justified. It's just that, we need a character to do this thing. So he gets mm-hmm. picked and whatever. And then, it's assumed, I guess, that his descendants, like God, does the flood and wipes everything out, and then Noah survives, and then he's like, yeah, I'm not going to do it again, but seems to kind of already be resigned to the fact that stuff's going to get shitty again. Mm-hmm. Right? He's like, yeah, we'll let you and what makes God think that Noah's descendants, not a one of them, is going to be mm-hmm. corrupt and start off some new family chain? So that's always been funny.
Yeah, and as soon as that's the thing. As soon as that scene ends, right, we get into like Noah condemning his sons for seeing him naked, right? So like the evil starts up again, right? And the evil now is like, oh, they saw me naked.
Yeah, it's just a big cycle. From a purely like technical standpoint, I've also wondered, how and why, presumably, did we get any fish on board the ark? And why didn't the ocean creatures, they probably fared fine during the flood, right? I mean, it's just more of their native habitat coming down. So
So the other animals were evil, but the fish were fine.
Yeah, fish are chill. How would you get a megalodon shark on board the ark? It seems like that one shark is probably bigger than the ark itself. Right? There's just some technical issues here.
Well, 6,000 years ago, we didn't have a megalodon shark, I don't think.
Was it older than that?
Yeah, maybe. I think. But that's the thing. If you accept like a literal kind of reading them, you're going to have to you're going to have to do a lot of work here, and you're going to have to do a lot of work that can't be that it can't actually be done. But at any rate, just kind of coming back, to the whole like to compare these two, because that's what the professor's doing there in that lecture. I agree with you from the standpoint of, are the whims of one dictatorial monotheistic God any less chaotic than a, somewhat round table discussion among multiple gods? Of course not. I mean, we've seen the havoc that one maniacal human being, can wreak, as long as they get enough other people infected with their idea. So if there's a being that is unchecked and can do exactly whatever they want at any given time, it's just as chaotic, if not more so, and more terrifying. One of the things that persists in the Gilgamesh epic is that, they bless Utnapishtim or Utnapishtim, however you pronounce it, with immortality. He's kind of rewarded for this, not dissimilar to what happens with Noah. But then in the meantime, as the Gilgamesh epic goes on, there's this plant out there that apparently can grant immortality to anybody. Mm-hmm. So the gods kind of like throw an olive branch out to humanity, and things continue on, and there's still like some semblance of harmony or reward, and like where human beings don't have to be fully dependent for the rest of eternity on God's provision and God's whim, or of the gods. Whereas, biblically in a monotheistic setup, it's like from here on out, he could do this again anytime. We don't know. We're totally at his mercy. And then there's just
so much more pain and suffering that all of the, his followers go through over the, the rest of the years and everything else. And it's just like, what really was the positive at the end of the day? You get the sense in Gilgamesh that like, he still has hope that he can do something good. He tries to find this plant that he could take back to his people and say he's found immortality. And, I don't know, maybe that's not that different from like, oh, just believe in me and you'll have eternal life. But you know what I'm saying? There's a couple bones that get thrown to humans in the Gilgamesh epic that aren't really thrown to people in the Bible. So,
I mean, I understand, monotheism from a, kind of like, I guess, somewhat more political perspective, the leveraging of power, right? With monotheism, it can look fairly different. And again, it's quote unquote progressive in that sense, but monotheism does not do away with like the same kind of contradictions that you see, polytheistic religion. Like, when God says that, makes human beings the way that he makes them, and says that there's a lot of evil and I'm going to kill, all of them except this one upstanding person and his family. And then, ultimately, says, I'm not going to do this again because what? People are evil from the beginning. So I need to let go of this. I have sorrow in my heart. And he's sort of arguing with himself, his like dealing with his own kind of internal contradictions. That does not resolve the issues in polytheism in the sense that, if you have multiple gods, they're simply arguing against, one another, right? They represent all the kind of like individual, moorings and unmoorings and drives and so on and so forth that are kind of inherent in like, one God. And you see them arguing with himself. Enlil, what does he represent? Well, he represents the more kind of, chaotic sort of, variation of all this. Where like, these people are too fucking noisy. Let me kill all of them. The other gods are more, they're more accommodating. They're maybe more empathetic. God in the Bible has, drives that are destructive and chaotic, and also ones that are very accommodating and empathetic as well. So all we see here is just, the only difference is that, this kind of internal war plays out within the mind of one person that is like one God that is like anthropomorphized. Whereas like there we have gods that are just kind of, it's the people that you and I know. Like we all know evil people. We all know good people. We all know chaotic people. We all know orderly people. And this is the drama that plays out in that world. And God is the one God is allowed to play out the drama just all internally. So, that contradiction is never resolved, and any kind of theological answer is just never going to be, very satisfying, because it's always going to be an ad hoc explanation. I mean, there's just kind of like no other way.
Yeah. Well, we can maybe move on, but the one final comment toward the end of the professor's lecture there that made me chuckle the first time I watched it, and also again this time, is he can't resist the wrap up, like the classic sermon style wrap up of, in the end, here's why this shows God's goodness and whatever. Yeah. And he says something to the effect of like, what we learn is that, the calm, stable, goodness and reliability of God persists no matter what life throws at us, no matter what storms befall us. And it's just like, dude, he's the one that made that storm happen. It wasn't just that someone's walking along and an earthquake hits and God's like, no, I got you, don't worry. God's like, yeah, I hate everything I've made. You all are evil. I'm going to destroy every single one of you except this one and his family. I mean, it's just hilarious to me that the comment would be God's got your back, even through life's difficulties. It's just like it's prosperity gospel, moment at the end there. That's like nowhere in the actual telling of this account is that what I would get out of it,
Yeah, always like in the sense that responsibility does not lie necessarily with God in that way. Never. It reminds me of like when you I remember when there was when you had like the Gaza protests a few years ago, where Israel started mowing down Gaza protesters, and I heard commentators saying this is terrible things are happening, people are getting killed, and it's like, like what the fuck do you think happened? Do you think people in Gaza got hit by lightning or something?
Right.
Like, what do you think this is? Like, what do you think is happening? Like, there's no responsibility. And yeah, it's always like the same way, right? If you don't want to swear with that, yeah. If you, and you know, the liberals that say that same stuff, like, you know, when Bush was saying during the Iraq War, mistakes were made, they were like, oh, look at that passive voice. But you know, with their own like pet sort of justifications for, you know, whatever, you know, bombing campaign or mowing down of whoever, you know, it's the same kind of it's the same kind of technique. And, you know, it's always been that way. But I mean, we mentioned the immortality stuff. Like we're pretty much like at the end of the text now. Yeah. So what was that like? Now it's like it's 11, right? Where he gets his where so like, you know, Uranapishti, after telling him about this flood story, it's you know so Gilgamesh gets challenged, right? Like, okay, so if you want to, you know, if you want immortality, you know, here's kind of like a taste of how that could happen, right? You have to be awake for like, what was like something like 7 days or something. Right. And of course, like Gilgamesh, like right away, just falls asleep. And Uranapishti says, okay, so you've fallen asleep. Here's something that I could offer to you regardless. There is this plant out in the ocean. If you get it, it's going to grant you immortality, right? And Gilgamesh ultimately, he's able to find the plant. He grabs it. He says he's going to bring it back to Uruk, and he's going to give it to like some old man and watch what happens. So he doesn't want to eat it first himself, right? Right. So he has it happily, and ultimately a serpent steals away with it, and he realizes that, you know, this trip was for nothing, in the sense that the thing that he wanted from it, right, the immortality, he's not going to get in the way that he wanted that immortality. And I mean, the text ends with you know, he returns to Uruk, and he says, I simply can't, right? I can't be moral in this way, but maybe there is like something else for me, right? After he like loses this plant, this is what he says. As it turned away the serpent, it slowed its skin. Then Gilgamesh sat there weeping. Down his cheeks the tears were coursing. He spoke to Urshanabi the boatman. For whom, Urshanabi, told my arms so hard? For whom ran dry the blood of my heart? Not for myself did I find a bounty. For the line of the earth I have done a favor. Now far and wide the tide is rising. Having opened the channel, I abandoned the tools. What thing would I find that served as my landmark, had I only turned back and left the boat on the shore? At 20 leagues, they broke bread. At 30 leagues, they pitched camp, right? This is going back to like that repetition from Enkidu when they were confronting Humbaba. When they arrived in Uruk, the sheepfold, said Gilgamesh to him, to Urshanabi the boatman, O Urshanabi, climb Uruk's wall and walk back and forth. Survey its foundations, examine the brickwork. Were its bricks not fired in an oven? Did the 7 sages not lay its foundations? A square mile is a city, a square mile date grove, a square mile is clay pit, half a square mile the temple of Ishtar, 3 square miles and half is Uruk's expanse, right? And this is how at least my edition ends, right? Which is this is similar to how it starts, right? Look at this land, look at this city, look at everything that has been built. And now it's almost like, but the thing is, at the beginning when it starts, that is like the writer, right? The narrator saying that. And here it's Gilgamesh saying it as a realization. Back then, it's just kind of, you know, it's a declarative. Here, you know, it seems to be a part of like a sense of regeneration, a sense of continuity, a sense of like something new is going to come of this, right? This is where my immortality might be, right? In the great works that I might construct. So, I mean, again, very kind of modern ending.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you just said there is how I also interpreted it or felt, where he's now gone through this mourning quest over Enkidu, and maybe is just in a reflective mood on everything he's been through and what they went through together, and he doesn't achieve immortality, even though he's met the person who did and told him how that came about, and so he's got more knowledge, he's got more wisdom now, we would assume, and he comes back to, quote, where it all began, comes back to Uruk, and it's almost like he's looking at it with fresh eyes, and he's impressed by it again in a way, and telling the boatman, like, look, measure it, like this is what I've built, and now I'm back, and maybe we'll make it greater and grander than it's ever been, kind of thing. But we don't know any of that for sure, right? The text would be weakened probably if then it started to go on and talk about a next chapter where he is in fact king again and building more monuments, building more orchards and temples and whatever. It's just he's looking at it, and like I said earlier, it kind of gives me this sense of if this were a film, it'd be just him standing at the top of a butte or a cliff or something and looking down on the city, and then maybe a quick shot of his face, and then just a shot of the city as still frame it for a few moments while a bird flies by and the wind whips through some trees or something, and it's just there. It's there. What's going to become of it? What's going to happen? And we're not given anything more than that. So, again, it's interesting. It's that modern feeling ending. There is no real, and they lived happily ever after kind of sense to the whole thing, or even redemption. I mean, it is filled with some of these feelings of regret and failure on the part of Gilgamesh, that we're sitting there with ourselves with him. So yeah, it's interesting. If you want, I can maybe just read a couple highlighted sections from that tablet 12 where he's going to another world.
Yeah, I mean, if there was something good there, because my edition says that, so like it's not part of the epic, right? But it's like an Akkadian prose translation of something that was just added in as a kind of like, well, this is just relevant material. But it does strike me that the way that this ends here, right, with Gilgamesh just kind of like looking out, repeating the start, that seems to be like a I don't want to call it a perfect ending, but if I were to write, if I were to have written this epic, this is exactly how I would end it. Right. There's just a lot of like loaded, like coiled, like poetic power doing things in that way specifically.
Yeah, I still think that ending it at the 11th tablet is the best thing, and just viewing tablet 12 as some kind of epilogue, not really a continuation of that story. It does have a very separate feel to it. Some of the language is different. But I'll just read a few lines that I highlighted here. So this is from where Gilgamesh has had like this drum and drumstick fall into the netherworld, and he's asking to be able to have Enkidu retrieve it for him. He said to Nergal, king of the netherworld, open a hole in the roof of the netherworld, so Enkidu may rise up like a vapor out of the netherworld into the upper. So this wanting of a reunion with Enkidu. Nergal obeyed the voice of Ea the god. The hole in the floor of the upper world was open. The spirit of Enkidu, a puff of breath, came forth from the netherworld into the upper. Then Gilgamesh and Enkidu, companions, tried to embrace and kiss one another, companions. Sighing toward one another, they spoke these words. Now tell me how it is in the netherworld. I will not tell you. If I told you how it is in the netherworld, the arrangement of things, you would sit down and weep because I told you. And then it kind of goes on, and finally Enkidu agrees to answer some questions that Gilgamesh wants to ask. So this is sort of how the whole thing ends. Have you seen in the netherworld the famous warrior, he who fell on the battlefield in glory? The grieving parents raise up the head of the son. The mourning wife grieves at the couch of death. And he whose corpse was thrown away unburied, he wanders without rest through the world down there. The one who goes to the netherworld without leaving behind him any to mourn for him. Garbage is what he eats in the netherworld. No dog would eat the food he has to eat. And that's the end of it. So you get this sense that it's, Gilgamesh kind of still up in the upper world, and his life has gone on, and he's wondering, like, these are things that kind of apply to me and how I am. How are these kind of people treated in the world beyond? And he doesn't really get many reassurances, So it's kind of bleak, really kind of bleak language, and you get the sense that like Enkidu has continued in a way to just sort of suffer and exist down there.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's tablet 12.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had some other stuff planned after this, but honestly, I'm just kind of tired. I mean, we're going to have another artifact with me, Dan, and Bruce Ario next week. So there's going to be more stuff coming soon. So thank you guys for watching. If you're not subscribed, please hit subscribe. Please hit like. That at a bare minimum just helps a lot. So thank you guys for sitting through this whole thing, and we'll see you again soon.
Sounds good.